Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself. But since you're still alive, whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-5049, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, commercials, commercials. As far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man Demon Dan coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride. Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP lookalike department. We all know how difficult the creation of Homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again. Not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Kettier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans. Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including Security Agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin.
Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing once I'm through with you.
Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. The creature dematerialized, before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons, and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. when the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts. They were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan, and through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off.
Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything.
Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said,
"You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us. I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming."
And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time, a different entity. Lots of people believe in the possibility of past lives. The notion that the life we are currently living is not our first. Before you were the person you are now, sitting at home and watching this video, maybe you were a medieval king, a Renaissance painter, or an ancient Spartan warrior. Past life regression is a controversial practice that allows people to look back at their supposed past lives, looking through the eyes of someone in another lifetime. It is a nice idea, and there's something exciting about the possibility of reliving the experiences of a person from the past. And wouldn't you know it, the SCP Foundation just so happened to discover an artifact that allows a person to experience another person's memories. It is not past life regression, and you have no control over whose life you're peeking into, but it allows you to look at the world through their eyes. However, when you look through someone else's eyes, there's always the possibility that you will see something you didn't want to. Something troubling, frightening, even traumatic, or worse. So you may not want to subject yourself to SCP-1123, or as it has been ominously nicknamed, the Atrocity Skull. SCP-1123 is an old human skull with no teeth or lower jaw. Across the forehead region of the skull, the Khmer word for remember is written in blood. Testing of the skull and blood determined it was from the 1970s, and that both the blood and skull belonged to the same person. The Atrocity Skull was discovered by a colonel in the Vietnamese People's Army in the 1980s, as part of a collection of human remains displayed in a Cambodian museum. Struck by the bloody writing and the peculiar feeling that the skull gave him, the colonel decided to send it to Hanoi for further investigation. While in transit though, the skull was intercepted by the SCP Foundation. Foundation agents set a trap along the road, blowing out the tires of the colonel's transportation. The skull was taken and sent to a Foundation facility, and the colonel was given an amnestic to remove all memory of the skull's discovery. The staff of the Cambodian Museum received a similar treatment. All written memories of the skull were erased, and now outside of the Foundation's archives, there is no official record of the skull ever having existed. The bloody writing on the skull has faded over time, and from a distance is barely visible at all. The first SCP Foundation agent to study the skull, an unknown researcher whose name has since been scrubbed from the Foundation archives, had a series of unusual experiences while observing the skull. He reported that the script was invisible from 5 meters away. As he approached it, he noted that the writing became clearer with each meter he got closer, until at 1 meter away the writing looked fresh. Unable to stop himself, he reached out to touch it, and found that his fingers came away slick and red. Somehow, the bloody writing was still wet, as if it had been drawn only moments before. As soon as he touched the text, he began to experience anomalous sensory phenomena. The room filled with the smell of smoke. He could hear the sound of heavy breathing and the pounding of a heartbeat. There were thundering footsteps behind him, and he turned to look, but found nothing there. He jerked his hand back away from the skull, recoiling at the sensation of ants crawling over the back of his hand. His eyes began to sting as if filled with ash, and he stumbled backward, only to fall to the ground from a sudden stabbing sensation, like a shard of glass piercing his shoe and the sole of his foot. The researcher was removed from the room and examined by a physician, who found that none of these sensations had accompanying physical symptoms. They were purely psychosomatic, so it seemed. There was nothing in his eyes, no wound on his foot. Contact with the skull had caused him to experience these physical stimuli, but it was all in his head. And this was far from the full extent of SCP-1123's impact on those who interacted with it. After several weeks untouched, the skull was examined by yet another Foundation researcher. When she touched the surface of the skull to lift it and take a closer look, she fell into a dissociative fugue state, a kind of distressing altered state of consciousness. She became confused, disoriented, and wouldn't respond to her name. The skull was removed from her grasp as soon as she became unresponsive, but this did nothing to return her to normal. The accompanying researchers simply had to observe her and wait for her to wake up. 6 hours later, when she finally did, she recounted what she experienced after touching the skull. She claimed that she had seen the life of another person in the time between touching the skull and returning to consciousness. She could recount details of this other person's life, describing places she had never been, events she had never witnessed, and even speaking a language she had previously demonstrated no command of. The other researchers determined that the person described actually had existed, though they had since passed away, and that all the little details were too specific to be a simple coincidence. After this encounter with SCP-1123, several other researchers experienced similarly traumatic fugue states. The Foundation was able to identify several shared characteristics among those who touched the skull and experienced the life of another person. All of the people whose memories were seen by test subjects died before the subject was born, were a victim of violence or imprisonment, died in a tragic or violent way by murder, starvation, or infection, and died as a result of being targeted by a political movement. These patterns led to the coining of the SCP's nickname, the Atrocity Skull. It is a skull that forces those who touch it to relive past atrocities. In order to further understand the nature of the skull's effects on test subjects and the nature of the lives it imprints on them, a series of experiments were performed by the Foundation. Various people of differing cultural backgrounds were exposed to the skull in an attempt to determine what correlation, if any, there is between someone exposed to the skull and the type of person whose memories they experience. In the first experiment, a man of Irish and French ancestry was told to touch the skull. He immediately collapsed and began to scream in Armenian and resist any and all assistance from Foundation officers. When he returned to full consciousness, He explained that he had taken on the memories of an Armenian farmer who was burned alive by the Ottoman army in 1915 during the Armenian genocide. During a different experiment, a man with Haitian ancestry touched the skull. Just before touching it, he complained of a chemical smell and a powerful itching sensation. After he touched it, he began to violently cough. His fugue state lasted for 60 minutes and was characterized by confusion and a sudden ability to speak Kurdish. After waking up from the fugue state, the man was able to describe the imprinted personality of an 85-year-old victim of a mustard gas attack in Iraq in 1989. A third experiment involved a woman with Chinese ancestry who became unresponsive for over 2 hours after touching the skull. She was clearly distressed and began to loudly weep as the time progressed. Once the 2 hours were up, she was able to give an interview where she described her experience while in the fugue state. She experienced the life of a young Ukrainian girl who died in 1932 as a result of violence at the hands of a Soviet brigade. Several other experiments were also conducted, producing similar results. Each time, the subject would experience a fugue state lasting from around an hour to upwards of 6 hours. The experiments allowed the Foundation to determine some statistical patterns in the personalities and memories experienced by test subjects. The more victims that can be attributed to a historical event, the more likely it is that a test subject will experience the memories of someone killed in that event. There is no apparent correlation between the nationality of the test subject and the nationality of the person whose memories they will live through. While there are no negative physical effects on test subjects who have come into contact with the skull, there is a notable psychological impact which can be attributed to the traumatic nature of the memories that they were exposed to during the course of the experiment. Subjects have demonstrated bouts of grief and depression, as well as struggles with survivor's guilt. Though they themselves did not survive the events that they witnessed, they feel as though they did. In an attempt to alleviate these psychological effects, the Foundation administered several types of amnestics to test subjects. However, these were not effective, and in many cases, they were actively harmful. The SCP Foundation uses a variety of amnestic compounds as a part of its work, but none of them were effective in treating test subjects who had been exposed to SCP-1123. Class B amnestics, or regressive retrograde, remove the most recently formed memories from a person's mind. When these were administered to SCP-1123 test subjects, their own memories began to fade away, while the memories of their imprinted personality remained intact. If the dosage was increased, only the memories of the atrocity would remain. Other amnestics with similar functions yielded similar and equally troubling results. The wrong memories would disappear, and the subject's original personality would begin to give way to that of the person the skull had imprinted on them. And so another type of amnestic was applied in an attempt to solve this issue. Class E amnestics, or ennui, do not remove memories from the subject's mind, but rather lessen the subject's emotional response to them. They are intended to weaken the neural pathways and remove the emotional component from a given memory, reducing the subject's stress or trauma response to the information of said memory. All of the science behind this class of amnestics suggests that it would be beneficial to the test subjects involved in this research, but for some reason they were still ineffective. The application of Class E amnestics to test subjects following exposure to the Atrocity skull only worsened the subject's trauma response, contributing to panic attacks, flashbacks, and other symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Eventually, the use of amnestics to benefit these test subjects was abandoned entirely. Experimentation with the skull was placed on hold until a beneficial treatment program for the test subjects could be established. Currently, to preserve the condition of the skull and the writing on its surface, SCP-1123 is kept contained in a hermetically sealed container in an argon gas atmosphere. When it is removed from containment for experimentation and testing, it is kept in light at no more than 50 lux, with the temperature inside the container kept between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius and 55% humidity. No one is permitted to handle the skull under any circumstances except for controlled experimentation. There is a saying that says those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. As distressing as the experience of touching SCP-1123 may be, perhaps there is a use for it. Confronting historical atrocities directly and looking through the eyes of their victims is a stark reminder of all the evil that humanity is capable of. Certainly, the history reflected by the Atrocity skull, imprinted directly into the minds of all who touch it, will not be soon forgotten. Those who have touched it, those who speak to them, and all who learn about the impact of the Atrocity skull should take care to remember history, to learn from it, to make sure that these evils are never repeated again. Perhaps we will even reach a point where we do not have to look through the eyes of the victims of institutionalized evil. We will simply have moved beyond it. Then and only then will it be time for the skull to be destroyed. Until then, it remains preserved in the halls of the SCP Foundation as a reminder that, amidst all the horrors contained in those walls, sometimes the greatest monster is us.
A man is sitting in a chair inside a containment cell at the SCP Foundation. The man is dressed normally, and he isn't trying to escape or attack the researchers who are observing him. The only thing that makes this man different from you or I is that he ages right in front of us, going from a teenager to an old man in a matter of minutes. At first glance, SCP-1007 looks very normal, just a corpse lying in a standard coffin. Well, the corpse of an old man in a coffin being kept locked up in a containment chamber is normal when compared to some of the other strange anomalies that are found in the SCP Foundation's archives. Inside the coffin with SCP-1007 is a small metal key, and this is quite literally the key to seeing what makes this anomaly so special. On SCP-1007's back, between his shoulder blades, is a small keyhole. X-ray scans of 1007 have shown that the keyhole is just an empty socket. It's unconnected to anything. There's no internal clockwork mechanisms or other machinery that should be able to be activated by a key. When the metal key that is kept in SCP-1007's coffin, classified as SCP-1007-1, is inserted into the keyhole on 1007's back and turned, something truly incredible happens. As the key is turned, SCP-1007 undergoes a change unlike anything the SCP Foundation has seen before. With each turn of the key, the subject's physical age is reversed by 1 full year. Foundation researchers are able to watch 1007 age in reverse in real time. Even any decay that had set in on the corpse is completely reversed and disappears as the key is wound and 1007 gets younger and younger. As the key is turned, 1007 will continue to de-age, physically compacting and shrinking down until it appears to have the form of a newborn human child. It's unknown where the physical mass of 1007's body goes to, since this should defy the laws of physics. But those laws we assume to be a bedrock of our universe's reality are often more of a suggestion when it comes to anomalies the SCP Foundation deals with. Once SCP-1007 reaches the newborn baby stage, it will suddenly reactivate, coming to life immediately, regardless of how long it has been dead and lying in its coffin. Once 1007 is brought back to life, he will go through the entire human life cycle within a 75-minute period, experiencing what looks to be approximately 1 year of normal human growth and development for every minute that passes. That means that in the course of about 16 minutes, researchers will see SCP-1007 change from a crying infant to a fully grown teenager. As you can imagine, the subject has reported feeling excruciating pain during these first few minutes, as his bones rapidly lengthen and expand, and his muscles develop and change shape dramatically. SCP-1007 is able to watch with his young eyes as his bones move and set themselves into place, lengthening and widening in seconds during growth spurts that normally take months or years. After about 5 minutes, provided his legs have grown to the same length at the same time, he's usually able to prop himself up and stand. At around 10 minutes, the pain really starts. The bones crack and ache as they grow at their fastest for the whole cycle. Hair will also grow on his face and body, and he can't help but feel some amount of shame and embarrassment at what's happening to him in front of the Foundation researchers, who are taking copious notes. By 20 minutes, he can hardly think due to the pain.
At this point, he usually lies down and curls into a ball, whispering to himself that it will all be over soon, that the pain won't last forever. After another 10 minutes, he's right. The pain has almost stopped completely by the 30-minute mark, but now as wrinkles and stretch marks start to set in, a different kind of pain reveals itself as SCP-1007 realizes that he must watch himself die. 40 minutes in, and he starts to reflect on his past, the life he was forced to lead as a kind of sideshow freak. More on that later, though. The physical decay happens faster now, warts and moles and other marks of age appearing on his skin. After 50 minutes, he is aware that over half of his life has passed, and he is reaching the end. His hair starts to fall out, as do his teeth, which he's never actually been able to use as he's never tasted food. As the 60-minute mark comes and goes, he begins to feel grateful for the coming end, with the escape from pain and the rest it would bring. His body has become very wrinkled by this point and is covered with age spots. His eyes begin to cloud, severely limiting his ability to see, and his hearing gets weaker and weaker until he can't comprehend anything the researchers say. At 75 minutes, it's all over. SCP-1007's body expires and he dies once again. He will remain as a corpse until the metal key is inserted into his back and the whole process starts once again. Just as there appears to be no explanation for where the mass of SCP-1007's body goes as the key is wound during the reversal process, so too is there no explanation for where the energy needed for his rapid growth comes from. This process should violate the first law of thermodynamics, and Foundation researchers are very curious about the underlying process. The one constant that remains on SCP-1007's body is a small tattoo on his right calf, where the words Mr. Life and Mr. Death from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment appear. This matches up with entry number 11 on document SCP-909, which lists a total of 20 Little Misters. SCP-1007 was recovered by Task Force Tau-6 during a raid on a mansion in California, along with several other anomalous creatures and objects. The owner of the mansion claimed that he acquired SCP-1007 at an auction hosted by Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited. Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited is a club based in London, England, that is famed for collecting and selling what it would describe as rare and obscure objects. Unfortunately, this often includes various anomalies that should be under the care of the SCP Foundation, and the club's mission to provide its members with exclusive, expensive, and rare experiences means that they're often in conflict with the Foundation, and they have even been responsible for several containment breaches. Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited continues to be a very secretive organization, and the name of the director and a list of its members have so far been very difficult to obtain. At the auction they hosted, where SCP-1007 was offered for sale, there were apparently, along with Mr. Life and Death, at least 4 other Misters for sale, though the identity of the other buyers and which Little Misters they may have purchased is still under investigation. The fact that SCP-1007 has the name Mr. Life and Mr. Death seems to imply that he may have originally been part of a set, though this counterpart Little Mister has yet to be recovered or even identified. In interviews with SCP-1007, he has given his own personal theory that he embodies both names, and the designation is a reference to the way he alternates between life and death. However, the possibility still remains though that he may have a twin of sorts, and the Foundation continues to investigate its possible identity and location. SCP-1007's brief 75-minute life followed by a death that lasts until he is rewound by a special key means that he is easily contained and has been classified as safe. He is only to be activated during routine testing, and after experiencing death, he is to be placed back into his coffin along with the key. In keeping with current regulations for all anomalies that have been designated as Misters, SCP-1007 is to be contained in Hall 8 of Site-13 for additional observation and study. In almost all respects, Kevin O'Reilly is your average 50-something Irish man. He lives in County Cork with his wife Martha, where he spends his day working at a local accountancy firm, and during his free evenings, he likes to take quiet walks through the nearby woods. There is only one remarkable thing that can be said about Kevin. He was the second human ever to encounter an example of SCP-3199. a dangerous Keter-class anomaly that has the power to knock humanity off the top of the food chain if left unchecked. We know what you're thinking. What about the first human? Don't worry, we'll get to him. But we can assure you, he's anything but unremarkable. Back to Kevin. He was enjoying one of his nightly walks when he heard a horrible shrieking sound in the distance. It sounded like a woman was being murdered, and just hearing it chilled poor Kevin to his core. His first instinct was to run to the woman's aid and do whatever he could, but there was a lurking anxiety under the surface. The echoing memory of an old childhood legend, the Banshee. A monstrous ghostly woman of Irish folklore whose blood-curdling screams always foretell death. But those were all just stories, surely. Grim omens to stop children from straying too far from the path. Kevin took his first brave step in the direction of that awful screaming, repeating the quiet mantra of, "There's no such thing as monsters" to himself again and again. If only he knew just how wrong he was. He ran deeper into the forest, following the awful sounds. Whoever this woman was, she certainly had some pipes on her. The screaming had been going on for minutes on end now, and it didn't seem to show any signs of subsiding. The sky above had darkened from everything to full-on night by the time Kevin reached the source of the screaming. Kevin found himself in a clearing in the forest, but in all his years of walking down here, he'd never seen it before. There was a ramshackle old cottage, rotten with age and damp, and next to it, a rusty old hut made from corrugated iron, like a kind of oversized chicken coop. From the tinny, echoing quality of the screams, he knew that they were coming from inside the hut. Was a woman being held captive here? Kevin was a smart man. He approached the tin hut quietly, not saying a word. If this woman had indeed been captured and was now being held against her will, it wouldn't help the situation to potentially alert her captor to his presence. This quick thinking is the reason that Kevin O'Reilly is still alive today. Because when he arrived outside the tin hut and peered in through the window, what he saw inside was not a woman. In fact, it wasn't even human. The beast that Kevin saw inside the hut was nothing short of a crime against nature. A twisted abomination that was only vaguely humanoid. Its bloated, fleshy body dripped with some kind of viscous fluid, and it looked more like a plucked rotten chicken than a person. The creature was shrieking and wailing, its huge body convulsing in the coop. It was making a gurgling, gagging noise, like something was strangling it. Kevin felt like he was going to be sick, but the monster beat him to it. It doubled over, its wretched, lipless mouth stretched open to freakish proportions and started to vomit something out. It was a gray, leathery mass, covered in dark red blood that soon flopped out onto the ground, among a number of other masses that looked just like it. The creature then gave one final wail and spewed out a red stream of blood and bile onto the masses. That's when Kevin realized what he was looking at. Eggs. A pile of big, unnatural eggs. The foul-smelling bile that the creature had just vomited up had no effect on the eggs, but it seemed to burn and corrode the surrounding environment. It hissed against the metal as thin wisps of steam rose from the scorch marks. Kevin was horrified, but also entranced by the bizarre sight, until the creature stood back up and began to turn towards him. Kevin didn't let his morbid curiosity get the better of him. He turned and sprinted out of the forest, knowing that if he lingered for even a second longer, he wouldn't return home alive. He ran, and finally heard the wailing fade into the distance behind him. This was the first ever outside brush with a specimen of SCP-3199, also known as Humans Refuted. Sadly, it would be far from the last, and would remain one of the rare few that wasn't deadly. When Kevin got back to town, he immediately told everyone what he saw. There's a monster in the woods, and it's breeding. He even told the local newspaper, which printed the headline, "Beast Sighted in Local Forest." It was enough to get the SCP Foundation's attention. Field agents were sent into the town proper to suppress the information leaking about the creature and gather any additional information they needed to assess whether they were dealing with a real anomaly here or just another crank. Straight away though, the agents could tell from Kevin's demeanor that he had seen something truly awful. He was given amnestics, and Mobile Task Force Omega-19 were dispatched to secure and contain the creatures that Kevin had seen. They had 12 well-armed personnel, trained and prepared to deal with anything. Or so they thought. They were led by Corporal Duncan, a seasoned MTF operative, and they used state-of-the-art night vision technology to gain a tactical advantage in the dead of night. All they had to work on though was the visual description provided by Mr. O'Reilly. It didn't take long for them to find the same clearing out in the woods. There was the rotten old cottage and the metal coop, just like Kevin had described. Two younger MTF members, Private McLeod and Private Langley, were eager to take the lead and prove themselves as they explored the dilapidated nightmare of a house. Once inside, they heard strange noises, what they assumed must have been footsteps coming from deeper in the home. They crept further in, and that's when Private McLeod first noticed it, the shape of a large, pale, bulbous figure at the end of a long hallway, shivering slightly in the cold. Compared to some of the hardened killers he had heard about in combat training, this creature looked like a piece of cake. This half-man, half-chicken. It was almost a walking joke. He leveled his weapon and grinned as he approached the creature, but Private McLeod had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated his enemy. In a later Foundation debriefing interview, Corporal Duncan would report with a dull horror what he saw happen to Private McLeod that terrible day. He'd never seen a smile fade from someone's face so fast. As the creature turned, shrieked, and sprinted down the hallway towards Private McLeod. The poor private barely even had time to raise his gun, his hands quivering with panic. Though even if McLeod had been quicker on the draw, it probably wouldn't have saved him. As the beast approached, it spewed its foul, stinking red bile onto McLeod's face. It was a sudden burning sensation so powerful that he passed out in an instant, his lower face dripping off of his own skull. He was dead in mere moments. Then, the beast leapt forward and began attacking Private Langley, biting and stinging and spewing more of its deadly acidic liquid. By the time it was done, there was barely any of Langley left to retrieve from the house. The 10 surviving task force members opened fire on the creature, but along with being surprisingly fast, it could also apparently take quite a licking. Even when Corporal Duncan managed a direct hit on the creature's chest, blowing a portion of it away, the monster just let out the most awful scream and continued fighting. Corporal Duncan admits that, to this day, that scream and the moonlight shining through the hole in the creature's chest continue to haunt him. When the monster was finally subdued, they were able to take it back to the nearby evac chopper and begin the journey to the nearest containment facility. But things took another terrible turn during that fateful flight. The creature's body began to convulse before vomiting up a pair of large, leathery eggs. Without a moment's hesitation, the eggs began to bulge and tear open, and a pair of rapidly growing SCP-3199 instances crawled out, attacking the Mobile Task Force members huddled together in the cramped confines of the helicopter. Once the second onslaught was over, only 4 of the remaining 10 members of personnel were left alive. The Foundation had discovered a formidable new foe. The specimens were brought back to Site-114 and placed in a modified version of the standard Keter-class containment chamber. It was fitted with acid-resistant steel walls and a series of transparent resin blocks to store the specimens inside for constant observation. But the creatures weren't given Keter-class for nothing. Escape attempts are frequent, and whenever they happen, the number of creatures in containment increases. The most frightening detail of SCP-3199 is the fact that it's impossible to reduce the number of them in existence. Each creature has a unique stomach-like organ inside its body which holds an egg in reserve. While it's possible to destroy one of the creatures, the eggs have proven to be almost indestructible. As a result, when one of them dies, the egg within it hatches and immediately grows into a replacement. And if the creatures are ever allowed to roam free, they begin laying eggs in any unoccupied space they can find, causing their numbers to grow. In theory, if left unchecked, they could supplant the human race with their own species in hardly any time at all. The only solution that the Foundation has found is submerging the creatures in sedative-laced water, as the beasts seem to inherently register water-filled areas as occupied space, and therefore do not begin laying eggs while submerged. But even the Foundation's most optimistic minds still admit this is only a temporary solution. But where did these awful creatures come from? After the chaos of the first mission, the Foundation had dispatched an additional Mobile Task Force Surface Team Delta 029E to perform a second sweep of the house and figure out what had been going on during the 2 decades of preceding silence. Inside, the team managed to collect a number of strange objects to bring back as evidence of the peculiar activities that had taken place there. Among these were a number of chicken carcasses that bore evidence of surgical dissection, a pair of chicken feather quills, and an A5 hardcover notebook labeled New Breed Manifesto. Its writer is believed to be deceased, most likely as a result of SCP-3199. But the final note scrawled inside the book and dated 1973 provides some insight into what had occurred inside that dilapidated shack in Ireland. It reads,
"If you're reading this, then lucky you. 400,000 hours from now, and it'll be warm and wet and warm, and the wonderful versatility of inferior human DNA will birth a better era, a stronger era. One where food and water will be nothing but things of the past as we make and make and make more until I really haven't much time. That's why I envy you so much. You'll have all the time you need. Time will be a thing of all the time will be on, and death will be life. Life needs things to live. New life will be part of life from now on."
These are the last words of the deranged mad scientist who created SCP-3199, perhaps under the demented belief that somehow they would make the world a better place. Personally, we don't think SCP-3199 have any interest in improving the world. But whether we like it or not, their insane creator is right about one thing. They're our problem now. Being a D-Class for the SCP Foundation is a lot like playing Russian roulette. One day you could be assigned to a tickle fight with a friendly blob of slime, and next you're getting your femurs broken to lure a sadistic old man back into his containment chamber. So, when D-9781 was told to simply sit in an interrogation room and wait, he really didn't know what to think. But the last thing he probably expected to see was when the door behind him creaked open, was for a well-dressed stranger to step in. This man wasn't like any member of Foundation staff the D-Class had ever seen. He was a short Caucasian man with a receding hairline and a neat black mustache. Instead of the standard lab coat and shirt normally seen around the facility, this man wore a black waistcoat, a pair of white gloves, and a wry smile that betrayed a sinister intent. He looked like a butler, and not just any butler, but the quintessential butler. If you were asked to doodle a cartoon butler, this would be the man you drew. The D-Class almost laughed in sheer confusion. He had no idea that, in a mere moment, he would be dead. "Now what's the deal, Jeeves?" he asked with a mocking half-smile, but he didn't get to hear a response. The butler approached at frightening speeds. The D-Class, in his last moments on Earth, saw the glint of something metallic under the overhead lights moving too fast for him to see what it was, and then felt a sharp pain across his throat. The butler was standing beside him now, still with that wry little smile. The D-Class could see now that the butler was carrying a small buck knife, dripping with red. Just as he was piecing together what had happened to him, the D-Class collapsed onto the table he was sitting at, his throat expertly slit. His grisly task completed, the butler gave a polite nod and exited the room, smiling at the Foundation guard standing outside. Who is this man? Why is he dressed like this? And most importantly, why is he allowed to murder D-Class personnel on Foundation grounds without consequence? We can answer that first question right now, because this isn't a man at all. He's the anomalous product of SCP-662, also known as the Butler's Handbell. First, we need to go back to the beginning. and see how this anomalous object first fell into the hands of the SCP Foundation. Like a lot of anomalous objects now under the care of the Foundation, its true origins remain mysterious, and it spent quite some time underground. We mean that literally, by the way. It was buried with its last owner, a man whose name has since been redacted from Foundation files. Clutched in this unknown man's skeletal hand, it was extremely likely that the bell might never have been seen again. But then a petty thief and grave robber by the name of George Dixon came along and dug up the grave. A simple, greedy act that has changed a number of people's lives forever. Not knowing the true value of what he held, Mr. Dixon made his way to a pawn shop for his payday. There, the store owner made the mistake of lifting up and ringing the bell. As if on cue, he heard footsteps approaching behind him. The store owner turned and gasped. He saw a complete stranger emerging from the stockroom behind him. He was a short, well-dressed man, smiling as he advanced towards him. The proprietor of the pawn shop didn't know who this guy with the strange outfit was, but he assumed he was an accomplice of the man in his store and that the two were trying to rob him. He grabbed a shotgun from underneath his counter, turned to the butler, and blasted him in the chest with both barrels. The butler fell back dead, and George Dixon fled the scene in a blind panic. Contrary to what the owner may have believed, nothing that happened here had been planned. Dixon was just as surprised as he was to see this mysterious butler emerge from the stockroom. So what had just happened? The pawn shop owner reported the incident to the authorities and the butler's body was taken to the local morgue, while the silver bell ended up in a police evidence locker. Later that same night, things went from a strange bungled robbery to a full-on anomaly, attracting the attention of the SCP Foundation. First, the butler's body disappeared from the morgue the second the mortician took her eyes off of it, and then reappeared, now alive, in the police storage locker. Why? Because an unwitting sergeant just so happened to ring the little silver bell. Agent Bradford of the SCP Foundation was promptly on the scene. He pretended to be an FBI agent and escorted the butler off the premises, claiming that this was a notorious escape artist who was wanted for federal crimes in several states. Things didn't go as Bradford planned though, when he discovered that the butler had disappeared from his handcuffs when no one was looking. Agent Bradford theorized that this had something to do with the bell, and he confiscated it for testing. Later, when he rang the bell inside an SCP containment facility, the butler turned up once more. He introduced himself as Mr. Deeds and said that he would happily perform any service that Agent Bradford required. Despite being offered the phenomenal power of a seemingly magical butler, Bradford politely refused the offer and instead handed the bell over to his superiors. But don't worry, Agent Bradford wasn't left completely empty-handed and was given the esteemed SCP Foundation Pat on the Back Award for performing such a professional and selfless act in service of the Foundation. The superior who ended up with the bell, however, wouldn't have quite the same level of professionalism, but more on that later. The bell, cataloged as SCP-662, was small and made of pure silver, with no obvious anomalous elements at face value. It was a mere 4 centimeters tall and 2 centimeters wide, with a small inscription reading, "Forever Mine, SJW." Researchers studying the bell also noted that it lacked its ringer, but whenever the bell was rung, a chime would still sound from somewhere in the room to signal the arrival of Mr. Deeds, the anomalous butler. The object was classified as safe and was kept in high-value storage locker 23C between uses for experiments. It's an extremely low-maintenance anomaly, with the only real requirement being a regular polish to keep the silver from tarnishing over time. But what of Mr. Deeds, the mysterious butler summoned every time someone rings SCP-662? The Foundation needed to find out more, so he was placed under the watchful eye of Foundation researcher Dr. Mirth, who performed the first interview with Mr. Deeds. As you can probably expect from such a classy servant, Mr. Deeds was unfailingly polite during the interview. He always addressed Dr. Mirth as Sir and was extremely accommodating, within reason. Mr. Deeds' true name, birthplace, and date of birth were still a mystery to him. He could only vaguely remember that he was of English ancestry, and that during the time of his childhood, the horse and buggy were the most popular form of transport. When asked about personal details or his past, Mr. Deeds would often appear to become distressed before apologizing for his inability to remember the details. The most important piece of information that Dr. Mirth obtained early on in the interview was the primary function of Mr. Deeds. He was an entity that quite literally lived to serve. Like a genie being summoned from his lamp, Mr. Deeds would try to perform any task that the summoner gave him, whether it was cooking dinner or robbing banks. There were certain limits to these powers though, and these limits were what Dr. Mirth needed to discover. Dr. Mirth first asked for a glass of iced tea from Mr. Deeds. The butler happily obliged and left the room, walking down the hallway. While attending agents kept their eyes on him, Mr. Deeds continued to merely walk. However, the second they looked away, the cameras observing him malfunctioned. Deeds briefly disappeared and then returned with a tray of iced tea. Dr. Mirth remarked that it was perhaps the best iced tea he'd ever tasted. Mr. Deeds couldn't recall how the tea was made though, or how he obtained it. Dr. Mirth next asked for a bar of gold at 99.98% purity, and Mr. Deeds delivered almost the exact level of purity Dr. Mirth asked for. From this, he deduced that Mr. Deeds can only perform his teleportation and manifestation abilities when he's out of people's direct lines of sight. He soon discovered that certain requests were off the table though. Dr. Mirth asked for Mr. Deeds to fetch him a blue 1963 Corvette convertible. Mr. Deeds did not immediately procure the car, instead telling the doctor that such a thing was impossible because there were too many impractical steps involved in getting the vehicle. Dr. Mirth was disappointed by this, since he really wanted that car. It seemed though as Mr. Deeds' powers, while enhanced by teleportation and the ability to manifest simple objects, are limited by things that a mostly normal and very persistent person could conceivably do. For example, on Dr. Mirth's orders, Mr. Deeds politely declined to assassinate an insurgent leader in the Middle East, seeing as he was too well guarded and very far away. However, when given the command, he was more than willing to head into the next room and murder a member of D-Class with a knife. Dr. Mirth was interested in getting a closer look at what was going on with Mr. Deeds' biology, and so asked him to slit his own throat with the same knife he used to murder the D-Class. Mr. Deeds politely obliged, commenting before he did to Dr. Mirth that it had been an absolute pleasure serving him. The body was kept within an agent's line of sight at all time until the autopsy could be performed, just to make sure it didn't disappear. The autopsy showed that there was nothing inherently anomalous about the physiology of Mr. Deeds, and he would appear as good as new the next time the bell rang. Things took an even stranger turn after that though. Despite it appearing like the Foundation now knew everything they needed to know about Mr. Deeds and the SCP-662 bell, Dr. Mirth insisted on performing further studies into what exactly Mr. Deeds was capable of. For example, he requested a deep tissue massage, and found that it completely cured his back pain. Dr. Mirth also asked Mr. Deeds to clean his car, and found that it was cleaned to a truly impeccable standard. During his tenure as the lead researcher on the 662 project, he also asked to receive a haircut from Mr. Deeds, and found out that while Mr. Deeds excelled at many tasks, he made a pretty bad barber. He was great at laundry though. Dr. Mirth was eventually removed from 662 duty by the O5 Council, once it became clear his research had just become an excuse for Mr. Deeds to do errands and chores for him. Of course, Mr. Deeds had no complaints either way, whether it's serving up delicious tea, cleaning a certain selfish researcher's home, or murdering a D-Class personnel with a buck knife. One thing cannot be denied: Mr. Deeds is one hell of a butler. You're driving down a long highway, lost in an area you don't know too well, trying to find the right turn that'll have you heading back towards your home. You keep driving, the nighttime quiet all around you. Deciding to try and break that silence, you reach for the radio, turning the dial to filter through all the garbled, distorted voices and songs from nearby local radio stations that are too far out of range to come through clearly. You try your best to listen to the music from one radio station, but eventually the sound of the static only makes you wish for the silence you were trying to break. Your fingers nudge the tuning dial on your car radio once again, and finally, something comes through. It isn't loud or clear, but under the distortion, you can make out the sound, and it isn't a song or even a late news broadcast. The first thing you hear sounds like a short musical tone, only for about 10 seconds. Next, a young girl's voice speaking in a language you don't understand, even through the distorted audio. From her accent, you assume it's Russian, but you still have no idea what the words she's saying mean. With nothing else to listen to, you let the broadcast play. Still driving alone in the dark with nothing but the strange adolescent voice to accompany you, your mind begins to wander. She sounds like she's speaking something, but the rhythm of the words is somehow familiar to you, even though you don't speak Russian. Then it hits you. She's counting, but you don't feel smart for having worked that out. Instead, something about knowing that makes your blood run cold. You carry on driving through the night. After a few short minutes, the Russian girl stops counting, and the musical tone plays again under the distortion, leaving you alone in the car once again, with nothing but your thoughts and questions of what exactly you just heard. Thankfully, we have the answer. What you heard was SCP-3034. Since 1964, this same broadcast has been made a vast number of times, 627 times in fact. You'd have to be within 2 kilometers of the broadcast's point of origin to hear it, where Foundation personnel have tried and failed numerous times to triangulate its source. The numbers heard recited in the SCP-3034 broadcast are actually a countdown from 200, read aloud in Russian. All Foundation staff are able to do while stationed at the nearby Provisional Site 3034 is scour radio frequencies for occurrences of SCP-3034. Checking their equipment is properly maintained and calibrated before they are eventually rotated off-site and replaced with a new group of staff. There is only one rule that any Foundation members working at Provisional Site 3034 must follow. They are only permitted to send one radio transmission with their equipment, a single phrase in reply to the SCP-3034 broadcast. Vizyo Harashu. Receiving this, the countdown stops and the broadcast ends, but never permanently. SCP-3034 has been known to repeatedly occur, seemingly at random. The shortest recorded gap between broadcasts was 2 weeks, while the longest so far lasted 6 whole months. You may have heard the term number station mentioned before, but these are far from just random numerical sequences sent out over the airwaves without purpose. General speculation surrounding number stations points to them being the tools of espionage agents, a way of sending coded, highly sensitive messages or information without the risk of compromising their cover. The use of number station transmissions is often attributed to spies working on foreign soil, who utilize shortwave radio frequencies, speech synthesis, Morse code, and either regular or sporadic timing schedules. While it's true that times have changed and technology has progressed considerably, there appears to be evidence that number stations are still used among various intelligence and espionage agencies today. Despite being considered an old-fashioned method of communication, these low-tech shortwave stations remain a viable, reliable option for the transmission and reception of intelligence to field agents. The CONET project is a comprehensive archive of this phenomenon, and its founder, Aiken Fernandez, has long been fascinated by number stations. According to him, this system is completely secure because the messages can't be tracked. The recipient could be anywhere. You just send spies to the country and get them to buy a radio. They know where to tune and when. So what does the distorted broadcast of numbers from SCP-3034 mean? Is it the work of covert agents? And if so, whose side are they on? Most importantly, why does the SCP Foundation make certain there are always 3 of its personnel on site, ready to send the all-is-well message whenever SCP-3034 begins broadcasting? SCP-3034 was first discovered by the Foundation in 1964, after a defector from the Soviet GRUP, a division tasked with acquiring and studying anomalies on behalf of the USSR, gave them a tip. Commander Robert Malthus, along with a team of 6, including a man named Agent Browning, selected for his knowledge of Russian dialects, were sent to investigate at Provisional Site 3034. Here, the team uncovered partially burned records and logbooks, all kept in Russian, along with evidence that the site had been evacuated shortly before their arrival. Carved into a desk, also in Russian, were 2 phrases: "Don't let her finish," and "Tell her all is well." On the team's second day at the site, an automated alarm sounded at 7:30 a.m., alerting them to the incoming SCP-3034 broadcast. Following the instructions on the desk, Agent Browning was able to stop the broadcast, telling the young Russian girl that all was well. A tape was partially recovered by the team from the site and translated from Russian. The GRUP members that had previously inhabited the station had interrogated one of their own, a man named Sergei, whom they accused of stealing state property.
"She's not state property," he replied. "She has a name."
While his GRUP superior accused Sergei of planning to defect to the United States, allegedly in exchange for money and asylum, Sergei denied any collusion with America. He claimed that the GRUP at Provisional Site 3034 were meddling with powers they could not possibly hope to understand. His superior, a man named Vaslov, dismissed this, claiming their work to be no different to the United States experimentation with atomic weapons at the time.
"One does not make deals with atom bombs," Sergei argued. "One certainly does not sacrifice little girls to them."
Shortly after this, a struggle broke out, with Sergei having to be restrained while urging Vaslov to cease any and all interference with it. The man spoke of terrible nightmares that he'd had, voices screaming in the darkness.
"That's what it wants, Vaslov. That's what it is. You cannot make a deal with this thing. We have finally contained it, and now you want to offer it."
The tape's audio ends shortly after this point, with no clear answer as to what Sergei was referring to, or what offer these Russian operatives had made to it. Ever since the discovery of SCP-3034, members of the SCP Foundation have worked tirelessly to understand the purpose of these countdowns, as well as determine their origin. By September 2012, Dr. Shulkill was reaching the end of his tether with the investigation into the SCP-3034 broadcast. Over almost half a century, the Foundation had made well over 600 recordings of the Russian girls' countdowns, but still hadn't determined any noteworthy information. They were prohibited from contacting the girl via the same radio frequency, only permitted to use the phrase that stopped her countdowns. Running out of options, Shulkill contacted his colleague, Dr. Emerson, asking for an in-depth vocal analysis of the various recordings of SCP-3034. Even if they could narrow down where the broadcast was coming from, maybe by determining the girl's geographical location from her dialect, then that would be at least some slight progress into understanding SCP-3034. While unable to discover the girl's location, Dr. Emerson's analysis did yield some interesting findings. Emerson learned that these countdowns were not pre-recorded. The variations in the Russian girl's voice, her tone, her pitch, all seemed to indicate that every instance of the broadcast was unique. Rather than use the same recording, this girl had been counting down over and over hundreds of times for almost 50 years. But there was more. Shulkill and Emerson then examined the distortion, the sounds interfering with the audio of the Russian girl's countdowns. What had initially seemed like garbled static seemed to actually be additional voices. And much like the girl's voice, these distorted voices were unique, different in every broadcast. However, Shulkill and Emerson were unable to accurately determine what these voices were saying. Given that the girls' countdowns were always cut short by the use of the phrase, "all is well," the doctors did not have long enough samples of the audio to analyze the other distorted voices. With permission from the Foundation, the next 5 occurrences of the SCP-3034 broadcast were allowed to carry on for longer, giving the 2 doctors enough audio to determine exactly what the distorted voices were. And the results were extremely troubling. They were screams. Thousands upon thousands of children's voices endlessly screaming. Both Dr. Emerson and Dr. Shulkill agreed that it would be best to continue responding to SCP-3034 with the correct phrase, and refused to analyze the distorted screaming audio any further. 3 years later, while stationed at Provisional Site 3034, a Foundation researcher named Dr. Uriel Willis decided to take matters into her own hands. She conducted an experiment that had not been sanctioned by the Foundation and attempted to make contact with the Russian girl giving the countdowns. Hearing Dr. Willis's voice, the girl stopped her countdown. After 5 long, painfully silent seconds, a new broadcast was heard. A piercing, high-pitched screech that caused extreme pain and dizziness to all the staff working on site. Unable to bear the disorienting sound, Dr. Willis told the girl all is well and caused the noise to stop. The following day, SCP researchers noted that there had been a significant increase in cases of missing children all around the world. A majority of these disappearances happened at the same time the Screech had been broadcast and remain unsolved to this day. Dr. Willis faced disciplinary action from the SCP Foundation, and any further testing of SCP-3034 and attempts to communicate with the Russian girl were prohibited. Only one distinct change has been noted in the SCP-3034 broadcast since this incident. Almost a month later, the countdown was detected in the correct phrase given, but researchers noted that, instead of starting her countdown from 200, this time the Russian girl began counting down from 199. Nobody knows what will happen if the Russian girl's countdown is allowed to reach 0. Personnel working at Provisional Site 3034 are told to always offer her the necessary phrase before this point in the countdown. Attempting to interfere with the broadcast by contacting this girl directly not only resulted in intense pain for SCP's staff, but also seems to have caused an unconfirmed number of child disappearances around the globe, as well as reducing the countdown starting number from 200 to 199. After a long night on the road, you finally find the right turn, sending you in the right direction. As you drive through the night, you keep telling yourself one thing, one small phrase over and over again. You hope the words will eventually give you comfort, but deep down you start to realize just how hollow they are. That it's just a lie we tell ourselves so we don't have to face the inevitable. But still, what choice do you have but to keep telling yourself that all is well?
It seems that nearly every small town has one place you're always told to avoid. Maybe it's an out-of-commission water tower, or an old power plant that's blocked off with a large fence that your parents warned you time and time again never to go anywhere near. But of course, the words caution, danger of death, or private property often seem like less a warning and more like a challenge to a bored kid living in a small town. In this instance, the place beyond the chain link fence you're not supposed to cross is a local radio station, a towering transmitter that looks like a huge needle pointed at the sky. On those long walks home from school, you were always tempted to climb over the fence just to get a closer look at the tower. If you were quick enough, you could dash back over and no one would ever know. Then one day you throw caution to the wind and ignore all the warnings. Because what's life without a little bit of adventure? You cross the metal fence to go and investigate the radio tower, but somehow the closer you step, the further away it seems to be. You walk and walk, but still never get closer. How much time has passed? Has it been hours, days, even months? Before you know it, you've spent 10 long years walking in circles trying every which way just to visit the tower. As it turns out, you probably should have paid attention to all the warning signs. Contained behind a perimeter fence is SCP-084, or also as it is known among Foundation staff, the Static Tower. Exactly what is transmitted from SCP-084 is intriguing, but also highly disturbing. Researchers working for the SCP Foundation have found that they are unable to properly examine the Static Tower, as anyone that gets within a 100-meter radius of SCP-084 suffers from various anomalous effects. It seems that SCP-084 is able to transmit a radio frequency, or possibly even a form of radiation of unknown origin. This emission appears to have an adverse effect on the space and time of the local area. This distortion has a limited radius, only reaching an active area that surrounds the static tower in a dome shape. Anything contained within this dome will both witness and experience the alterations that SCP-084 causes. The most commonly occurring of SCP-084's different effects is that the tower appears to teleport at random intervals, able to disappear from one location and reappear at another. Sometimes the static tower will even appear to materialize in several locations at once, not staying quite as static as its nickname would suggest. It does seem to be limited to the field it was discovered in, but wherever in that space SCP-084 jumps to, the dome-shaped active area around it will also move.
keeping the tower at its center. Due to the space and time warping effects it emits, the static tower is impossible to reach, either on foot or through the use of any type of vehicle. Any attempts to get close enough to examine the tower have ended the same. The space within the surrounding dome appears to be unlimited, meaning that SCP-084 stays at a relative distance, as if it was always stuck on the horizon. No matter how long someone travels towards it, days, weeks, months, or even years, the static tower will remain out of reach. One man that the Foundation encountered within SCP-084's area of effect had apparently been trying for 6 years to reach the tower, traveling miles upon miles but never getting any closer. Additionally, the tower cannot be destroyed. The Foundation has already attempted a number of conventional methods of destruction, but these have similarly never been able to reach SCP-084. Even if a projectile is launched from outside the active area dome that surrounds the tower, it will never hit its intended target. The static tower can warp nearby space around it, almost in self-defense. Distances can randomly extend or contract, causing the tower and its 2 small outbuildings to suddenly teleport away in order to avoid incoming damage. During the Foundation's lengthy and ongoing observation of the static tower, a vast number of anomalous occurrences have taken place. Among those documented by the SCP Foundation's sentries and researchers is the bizarre behavior of any animals spotted nearby. Very few can actually be found within the active area dome, and any seen beyond the dome's threshold appears to instinctively know to avoid it. Any animals that do happen to appear within the area surrounding SCP-084 will exhibit a very strange behavior. Their movements shudder or repeat in loops like a GIF. These abnormalities suggest that they are not real animals, but merely strange copies with only a limited, repetitive pattern of movement that ends when they disappear after 3 to 4 hours. Speech also seems to be affected when someone is within the dome, with a number of reports describing vocal communication being muffled when inside the area around the static tower. Other times when people stand apart, their voices begin to echo, with words usually being heard several seconds after they are uttered by the speaker, or even after they have stopped speaking altogether. Within the active area dome around the static tower, the local environment also seems to be affected by the tower's anomalous properties. Rain, snow, hail, or sudden heat waves will occur seemingly at random, and usually the weather within the dome is completely different to that outside. The sky will flicker and blur between different states as well, shifting from day to night, or clear to cloudy at a moment's notice. Additionally, no damage can be done to the environment around SCP-084. Even digging up the ground will cause the Earth to reset itself. Situated near the field where SCP-084 can be found is a small township. However, this location is only visible to anyone that finds themselves within the active dome around SCP-084. It has been speculated that this town was part of the local area and may have existed before the static tower first manifested, but that it has since become subjected to the tower's distortion of reality. According to further investigations, the town has an unchanging population. Only 343 people reside there, no more and no less. It appears that new births are impossible and cannot occur within the town. In much the same spirit, nobody living there can die. Any attempts at homicide result in dead persons flickering before being returned to life seconds after dying. There have also been reports from this town of events reversing, almost as if time rewinds. This has most notably occurred when any town resident suffers a fatal accident or receives an extreme wound of some kind. When this happens, the affected individual will be able to witness their injury visibly freeze and then reverse itself. Cuts close, and bones reset all on their own. People within the dome, like the residents of the nearby town, will sometimes exhibit spontaneous blurring, their arms, legs, or head shuddering violently at impossible speeds. Despite this being physically impossible without injury, any subject seen blurring usually remains unaware of this and feels no pain from the sudden gyration. Much like the animals within the dome, human beings will also get stuck in isolated time loops, repeating simple actions without being able to control themselves. Someone might freeze after walking through a door, flickering out of existence for a split second, only to appear at their original starting point and walk through the same door
again. According to the findings of the Foundation researchers, the town residents living within the vicinity of SCP-084 no longer have basic human needs. They don't get hungry or starve, they cannot be dehydrated, and don't even sleep thanks to being trapped within the static tower's area of effect. At random moments, townsfolk will be able to phase through solid matter, walking through walls or phasing through floors. This effect seems to last for brief periods of time, but can often have catastrophic results. Any passing through a surface or object when this period ends will often end up stuck until the effect reoccurs. Being unable to die, this does not kill these individuals, and instead they end up painfully fused with solid matter. One person even found themselves trapped in a wall from the waist down for 2 whole years. Long-term exposure to SCP-084 and its various anomalous effects have caused the 343 residents of the nearby town untold amounts of harm and distress. One can only dread to think of their collective psychological state, having to live life in an undetectable bubble, getting stuck in time loops, repeating mundane actions over and over again, phasing through surfaces only to find themselves stuck in place. These unlucky souls have no means of reprieve or means of escape. All information regarding SCP-084 has to be documented on paper, as electronic devices such as cameras, phones, computers are unable to properly function and record while inside the static tower's area of effect. Any audio or video playback devices, such as radios or camcorders, often detect bizarre and unsettling transmissions. It is unknown if these originate from the tower itself, though, or are just the result of using electronics within the active area surrounding it. The dome that engulfs this town, with SCP-084 at its center, has left the area completely isolated from the world. It is because of this that there is little the SCP Foundation can do to contain the static tower, other than to wait and watch. Personnel are instructed not to attempt any interaction with SCP-084, and instead the tower has been placed under round-the-clock surveillance to monitor any changes and observe any anomalous effects it may cause. The Foundation hopes to divert any unwanted civilian attention away from the area. There are no roads or publicly accessible routes leading to SCP-084 or the nearby town, and Foundation security will detain anyone that somehow finds their way headed towards the static tower. Only with full permission of 2 O5 Council members are researchers and other Foundation personnel permitted to enter the dome. Sentry teams provide additional security and are stationed nearby within the tower's line of sight. These units have to be near enough to see the tower with their own eyes, as even viewing SCP-084 through binoculars or telescopes makes the tower appear fuzzy and out of focus. All electronic devices, including radios, televisions, cell phones, video or photo cameras, global positioning systems, are banned from the vicinity of SCP-084. This is done in hopes of avoiding any unwelcome interference from the tower's reality warping frequency. Any civilian in the nearby area carrying any of these devices or attempting to record SCP-084 by any means will have their electronics confiscated and their recordings destroyed. Given that no one can get close enough or even examine it from a distance with binoculars or other implements, there exists no detailed description of what's inside SCP-084. All that is known about its physical makeup is what can be seen from a distance, that it is a solitary radio tower. The SCP Foundation has, as of yet, also been unable to determine the exact nature of what is being transmitted by SCP-084. Does the static tower send out a frequency so powerful that it can warp space and time? And if so, is the tower itself sentient, or was it designed by someone for exactly this purpose? Whatever the answer is, we would recommend keeping your distance from this hazardous site. Perhaps it would be best to abide by the warning signs for the time being. After all, you'd hate to wander too far and not be able to make your way back. If you have ever taken a trip to Suntop Mountain in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, Washington State, then you may have come across an old wooden structure, the Suntop Fire Lookout. Built in the early 1930s, the building was used by the U.S. Forest Service to keep watch for any fires in the nearby woodland. At one point, Suntop Fire Lookout would have been manned 365 days a year. complete with a bed for staff who were stationed there on rotation. The single-story lookout house overlooks the scenic valleys of the White River and Huckleberry Creek, but you're not here for an informative tourist guide. You probably don't care about the frankly fascinating history of the lookout and how it was used as part of the aircraft warning service during World War II, watching for enemy planes. No. You're here because something much darker lurks inside the Suntop Fire Lookout. And even though it appears to be a simple one-story tall wooden structure, it certainly is not short on space. SCP-3333 refers to an anomaly that the Foundation discovered inside the Suntop Fire Lookout House. The building's interior is a single square room measuring 14 feet by 14 feet, with large windows on all 4 sides. When standing inside Suntop Fire Lookout, looking up at the wooden ceiling, one will immediately notice a trap door. No big deal, right? A lot of places have a ceiling entrance to a small crawl space. There's probably nothing behind that trap door, apart from a dusty old attic. There's a latch that maybe once had a padlock there, but not anymore. Opening the trap door will reveal a collapsible ladder. Should anyone be brave or indeed foolish enough to begin to climb, then they'll soon find themselves right back where they started, inside Suntop Fire Lookout. Or so it will seem. The thing about being in a place like the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest that surrounds Suntop Fire Lookout is that woodland areas are teeming with life. Not just plants and trees, but birds and other animals of the forest. You can never truly be alone in a setting like that. There is always life everywhere around you. So when you ascend the ladder and climb right back into the Suntop Fire Lookout, that is the first most noticeable difference you will find. It may take a while at first, but the nagging absence of something unusually so abundant in a forest will eventually become obvious. It's quiet, far too quiet. No birdsong or the sound of distant calls from woodland critters, just silence all around. Anyone ascending the ladder will find themselves in a copy of Suntop Fire Lookout's interior, 1 story higher than the ground level of the small wooden building, with the stairs leading up to the front door getting taller each time to reach up to the higher and higher building. Now you know the SCP Foundation and the types of bizarre interdimensional anomalies that they're used to dealing with. Perhaps SCP-3333 is a mirror dimension, or a plane of existence where sound doesn't travel. It certainly seems to be identical to the Suntop Fire Lookout, save for the lack of any organic life outside. Of course, it's what you'll find living inside SCP-3333 that you may want to worry about. Climbing higher up the next ladder and through the next trapdoor every time with the same result. You appear at another copy of Suntop Fire Lookout, each one higher up than the last. What first seemed to be an innocuous, unassuming wooden building is now an endless ascension up into the heavens, towards the unknown in silence, without a shred of plant or animal life outside. As you climb, perhaps you start to think about how much higher these copies go. This might even be the biblical Jacob's Ladder connecting heaven and earth. That would be nice, wouldn't it? If you were gradually climbing your way up to paradise, it might make it worth the trip. But SCP-3333 is nothing that pleasant. You wouldn't be the first to attempt this long climb. When the SCP Foundation first discovered SCP-3333, a research detail set up an on-site base camp to examine this spatial anomaly. Their first exploration involved sending a member of D-Class personnel, designated D4F68A, up the ladder. His D number is a hexadecimal code that, when translated to text, reads O, so we'll call him that for brevity's sake. During the first day's exploration, O was able to climb 184 iterations of SCP-3333, communicating with head researcher Dr. Williams below. On the second day, O could see a pair of figures standing motionless on a nearby ridge, but the pair could not be seen by Dr. Williams and the other researchers at the base camp. Both figures disappeared shortly after O spotted them with the camera he had been issued, and he felt uneasy, almost certain that he saw them point at him. The next day, at the 345th copy of Suntop Fire Lookout, O's behavior started to noticeably change. Previously, he had been anxious about the long climb and hadn't questioned directions given to him by Dr. Williams. Now he seemed to speak more casually, resisting instructions, asking Williams to climb back down and even calling her Doc instead of Doctor. O also reported seeing writing on the walls, but there was no evidence of this on his camera. It appeared that something had started to affect him. It was when O reached level 527 that things seemed to change more dramatically. Rather than SCP-3333 continuing upwards, the copies of Suntop Fire Lookout no longer had a trapdoor or ladder. They seemed to be arranged side by side in a grid-like pattern. Stepping out of the main doorway, O remarked on the lack of sunlight and a walkway that connected directly to the front door of the next iteration of SCP-3333. O complained about the lack of natural light and again requested to be allowed back down. Dr. Williams instructed O to use the flashlights he was provided, but they wouldn't activate and their spare batteries had vanished. O then noticed a sudden movement, and just then his microphone and camera feed went dead, almost as if someone had turned them off. It appeared that SCP-3333 had something else lurking up there. Dr. Williams oversaw the second expedition into SCP-3333. This time, members of Mobile Task Force Mod 0, also known by the codename Characteristic Eigenspaces, were sent up the ladder. Their ascent through the various copies of Suntop Fire Lookout were not as eventful as O's, with no signs of mysterious figures or anxious feelings that O seemed to feel as he climbed. When they reached level 527, where the copies of the Lookout stopped progressing upwards and spread out in a pattern instead, their lights and equipment all seemed to be in working order. However, as the MTF team split up, one by one they encountered some sort of anomaly, or an effect of SCP-3333 that caused each of them to vanish into the dark. Either that, or something took them. These MTF units reappeared confused, and Mod 5, the team's leader Graham Purcell, issued an order to retreat and the entire squad went back down the ladders for several days, until they finally reached the base camp again. The members of Mod 0 were adamant they did not wish to climb SCP-3333 again, but Dr. Williams was beginning to understand more of the anomaly's effects. It appeared to cause abrupt changes to people's personalities, along with some sort of phenomenon that caused things to appear and disappear the higher one climbed. Assuming these were the result of a mimetic effect, Dr. Williams dispatched a counter-mimetic specialist for the next expedition. This specialist was a blind, deaf, and mute woman known as Annette, or the Null Walker, who communicated via a signaling system embedded in her hand, but was otherwise immune to any mimetic influences. Observed by Dr. Williams and Graham Purcell at base camp, Annette made her way to the top of SCP-3333, reporting that she was aware of someone watching her from outside the copies of Suntop Fire Lookout. On her body camera, a flicker of motion occurred, something looking through the windows that ducked out of frame when the camera passed in its direction. At the apex of SCP-3333, Annette kept her flashlight off, but reported that she could detect blood, following it to what she assumed was a body. Sounds of movement surrounded her, and as Annette switched on her flashlight, Williams and Purcell saw that it wasn't a body in front of her. Instead, it was a pile of rotting organs, decomposing muscles, and discarded bones. And among the pile was a metal dog tag that read, MTF Mod 5, Graham Purcell. The same man who was sitting next to Dr. Williams at base camp. Well, the same man on the outside, at least. The explanation for everything going on inside SCP-3333, all these strange occurrences and disappearances, finally came in a video sent from Dr. Williams' cell phone. In it, a panicked Williams, covered in blood, was fleeing from something at the top of the recursive stack of SCP-3333. There was no mimetic effect at the apex of the Suntop Fire Lookout copies. Nothing was causing the people that the Foundation sent up to act unlike themselves. They simply weren't themselves anymore. According to her frantic video, Dr. Williams had discovered the truth about what else was hiding within SCP-3333. With just the right amount of vagueness and intrigue, the research team had been drawn in. It was as if they'd been lured in by the lights of an anglerfish. realizing their grim fate only too late. The D-Class O, the MTF team, even Annette had been replaced. An unknown group of entities on the top level of SCP-3333 had been carefully observing them, waiting until they would not be seen to slip in and switch places. These entities had been creating imagined anomalous effects, like O seeing figures that weren't really there, as a way of luring more bodies further up the stack. They wanted the Foundation to keep sending expeditions into SCP-3333 to keep them coming back. The mass of organs, musculature, and bones that Annette had stumbled across, revealing the ruse, had once belonged to Graham Purcell, before he was replaced. You see, the entities residing in SCP-3333 weren't just copying people. They weren't possessing them or mind-controlling them, or even shape-shifting to steal a person's likeness. They were taking skin. These creatures hollowed out Graham, O, Annette, and the MTF team, pulling out their innards and crawling their way inside, filling these fleshy puppets and leaving their internal organs to rot. These hollowed-out people became vessels for the entities of SCP-3333 to hide in. The whole thing had been a trap, intentionally exploiting human weaknesses, intrigue, and unanswered questions. You know what they say about curiosity, and these entities used it to bring more potential vessels to the top of SCP-3333. They pretended to be the people who they had replaced, imitating them so the Foundation would send more personnel to explore the tower, increasing their supply of skins. Graham's dog tag had revealed the deception, and Dr. Williams had escaped up SCP-3333. The members of the research team that had already been replaced were hot on her tail, determined to catch and hollow her out too, and by the end of her video, they had succeeded. A month later though, a team delivering supplies realized what had happened and the trapdoor was sealed. Sun Top Fire Lookout was put under permanent guard, but at least 50 personnel were killed or replaced by one of the entities. A new mobile task force, Lambda-1 Maxwell's Demons, was created to hunt down and neutralize any of the entities that had escaped SCP-3333. But it's still unknown how many left the tower and are still out there somewhere waiting to use someone's curiosity about the strange and unknown against them.
Now, every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. It's an iconic line from It's a Wonderful Life, and even if you don't believe in angels, it is a pleasant image. After all, angels are the embodiment of goodness and light, so an angel getting its wings has to be a good thing, right? Well, as anyone who's ever eaten one too many Christmas cookies can tell you, it's possible to have too much of a good thing. Even something that sounds like the embodiment of all things good in theory can become deadly when taken to the extreme. That is where SCP-469, also known as the Many-Winged Angel, comes in. This angel-like creature is anything but innocent, and in fact it has been responsible for multiple deaths of SCP Foundation personnel during its captivity. SCP-469 may be deadly, but it is also undeniably beautiful in a mysterious, ethereal way. When first seen, it appears to be nothing more than a massive pile of pristine white feathers, like something out of a pillow commercial. The pile measures 24 feet in diameter and weighs at least 2 tons. However, like many of the entities contained within the walls of the Foundation's countless containment sites, all is not as it seems with 469. What looks at first glance to be a pile of feathers is in fact a dense, curled mass of giant wings. The wings vary in size from the tiny wingspan of a sparrow to the staggering 3.6-meter wingspan of the wandering albatross. The one thing they have in common is their plumage, with each wing being covered with the same glossy white feathers. The Foundation was able to perform a series of X-rays on the massive wings, revealing a skeletal structure beneath the feathers. Like those of a bird, the wings' bones are hollow. However, they are unnaturally soft and flexible, allowing for a range of motion that no known bird possesses. This accounts for the curvature of the wings and their ability to coil tightly into each other. The X-ray also provided the first and only recorded glimpse at the creature hiding underneath all the feathers. At the center of the layers upon layers of wings is a humanoid creature curled into a fetal position. In defiance of the laws of natural anatomy, every single wing appears to be fused to this creature's spine. How would it be able to move under the weight of these wings, or even if it could, is as of yet unknown. The first Foundation personnel lost to SCP-469 were D-Class personnel D-112 and D-624, who were sent in to investigate the nature of the creature and attempt to contact the humanoid entity identified on the X-rays. 112 and 624 entered the room, equipped with gloves and protective eye gear, as scientists watched the situation unfold on a monitor on a video feed. No one expected much to come of the encounter. The working hypothesis was the layers of feathers would simply be too thick to get through without seriously damaging the bones. It would be a fairly uneventful experiment, or so they thought. 112 approached SCP-469 first, and attempted to part a section of its feathers with his hands as 624 stood back and observed. The moment his fingertips touched the feathers, a rustling sound filled the room. The feathers began to quiver, shaking as if all waking up at once from a deep slumber. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the hundreds and hundreds of wings unfurled and pulled 112 into their depths. He was swept into a swirl of feathers, and within seconds, he had disappeared from view completely. Though 624 and the scientists watching on their monitor could no longer see him, they could certainly hear him. From the moment the wings pulled him into the sea of feathers, 112 had begun to scream in agony. His screams persisted, growing louder and more desperate even as the voice cracked and grew weak. 624 stood, frozen in place with fear and shock. 624 was ordered to attempt to retrieve 112 from the feathers, but made no move to do so. He simply stared at the feathers, eyes wide, face pale, as the pained shrieks of his colleague bounced off the sterile white walls of the containment room. A guard called over the intercom, threatening to terminate 624 if he did not attempt to remove 112 from SCP-469's grasp. This warning seemed to shock 624 back into action, and he made a run for the center feathers, arms up to protect his face. Again, the sound of rustling as the feathers began to quake. The wings unfurled once more, and 624 did not even have a chance to turn back before he was pulled in to meet the same dismal fate as the other D-Class. His screams of pain joined 112 as the scientists watching over the monitor could do nothing to help them. As the two men cried out in pain and horror from within their winged prison, something began to happen that the scientists had never seen before. The feathers started to shake again, faster than before, and at first the wings appeared to be unfolding again. Upon second look, though, it was clear they hadn't moved. There were simply more of them now. As the men continued to scream, more feathers appeared, the wings stretching out and elongating as new wings sprouted as if from nowhere. SCP-469 appeared to be feeding on the sound of their screams, and using that energy to expand. It was only after several long minutes when the screaming finally stopped that the growth of the wings did too. At this point, the wings shifted again, expelling the bodies of 112 and 624 from within its folds, dropping them limply on the ground. Though their deaths were unfortunate, the loss of 112 and 624 did reveal some new information about SCP-469. First, that it could grow, and apparently needed to feed on sounds in order to do so. Second, that it was deadly to humans, and most likely to other living things as well. Autopsies of 112 and 624's corpses would later reveal exactly what happened to them, and how SCP-469 kills its prey. Though 469's feathers may look as though they would be soft to the touch, each feather is actually made up of sharp barbs that are capable of piercing clothing and skin. These barbs release a neurotoxin into the system that activates every pain receptor in the body of the victim. The neurotoxin present in these feathers has not been identified anywhere else in nature, but is somewhat similar in structure and function to the neurotoxins excreted by the cone snail and in the bite of the blue-ringed octopus. In addition to the pain-inducing neurotoxin, the feathers also carry several unidentified stimulant compounds, where the neurotoxin on its own would induce enough pain for the affected party to pass out almost immediately. The stimulant served to keep the victim conscious. SCP Foundation scientists posit that this is so that 469 can get as much noise, in this case in the form of screams, out of its pain as possible, and achieve maximum growth before the captive creature dies or goes into shock. Further experiments confirmed this theory, and showed that SCP-469 will react similarly when exposed to any living creature capable of making a sound and experiencing pain, not just humans. Non-living matter, though, including dead animals, elicit no response from 469. Additional experiments were then undertaken that involved applying various different sounds in order to test their effect on SCP-469's growth. Though it feeds on any sounds produced in its presence, it seems to respond most strongly to musical sounds, exhibiting a particularly strong response to classical music. No sound elicits a stronger reaction from this creature, however, than the sound of ringing bells. It is rumored that when a bell was rung in the presence of 469, the humanoid at the center of the feathers is said to have moved for the first time on record. Apparently, whatever is at the center appeared to wake up and unfurl its wings, revealing itself. But unfortunately, all security footage of this incident has been wiped, and the data has been expunged from the record, leaving the creature's true form a mystery. You may be remembering that 4 members of Foundation personnel on record were lost to SCP-469, and that only 2 have been mentioned so far. The second pair of casualties resulted when the Foundation attempted to terminate SCP-469, believing that there was no more scientific benefit to keeping it alive, or at least that the possible benefits did not outweigh the risks. It was ordered that SCP-469 be terminated by any means necessary. 2 skilled personnel, Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith, were sent into the containment facility in hazmat gear, armed with several sharp instruments. They were to attempt to use these to cut through the forest of feathers and soft bones until they could reach the humanoid at the center. It was presumed that once they did, and the creature no longer had the protection of its poisonous feathers, that it would be relatively easy to kill. They could not have been more wrong. Dr. Jones approached the dense cover of feathers with a pair of sharpened gardening shears, while Dr. Smith opted for a machete. At first, the strategy appeared to be working. Dr. Jones made several quick cuts, with feathers fluttering to the floor and sticking to the hazmat suit as Dr. Smith slashed into the feathers with his machete, making similarly promising progress. However, the situation quickly took a turn for the worse when Dr. Jones dropped her shears and let out a blood-curdling scream. The feathers had taken a little longer to get through the suit to her skin, but somehow they managed to find a way just the same. Smith grabbed Jones and attempted to make a break for it, but he was too slow and far too close to the feathers already. The wings wrapped around them and swallowed them both up, leaving the researchers outside helpless to do anything but listen to their screams and wait for them to go quiet. After several minutes, they finally did, and now larger SCP-469 had officially claimed another 2 Foundation personnel. Obviously, 469 could not be terminated using any methods that would place the responsible personnel within its grasp. That was simply too risky. So the Foundation selected a team of D-Class personnel to attempt to burn the feathers with an array of flamethrowers. Though the feathers were vulnerable to fire and began to blacken and disintegrate on contact, the sound of the flames being expelled was loud enough to feed SCP-469. Its growth was so quick in response to the noise that the fire could not keep up with the amount of new feathers and wings being produced. By the same time the flamethrowers ran out of propellant, 469 was the same size it had been when they started. Other terminations have been discussed, including the possibility of submerging the entire creature in a highly corrosive acid, but so far this has not yet been attempted. Whatever they end up trying, it is clear that nothing that produces a significant amount of noise will be able to kill 469. So where is it now? What's become of this perverse angel with the never-ending wings? Currently, it is kept in an airtight, soundproof chamber where nothing can trigger the growth of any more wings. So, what is it? An angel? A demon? A twisted, mutated bird of some kind? It is entirely possible that we will never know. But It's a Wonderful Life had something right, even by accident. Every time a bell rings, something, twisted and deadly though it may be, gets its wings.
Commander McGrath, one of the most influential members of Mobile Task Force Alpha-1, better known as the Red Right Hand, had been summoned by his masters for one of the most important missions of his life. It was so above top secret, even he would likely need to undergo amnestic treatment once he'd seen the job through. It comes with the territory when you're dealing with SCP-006. The Red Right Hand is no ordinary mobile task force either. They were the personal enforcers of the O5 Council, the 13 most powerful members of the SCP Foundation, and by extension, some of the most powerful human beings on Earth. Commander McGrath stood before the assembled council, trying to suppress the tremors of fear and awe running through him. He'd gone toe-to-toe with SCP-076 Abel, one of the finest humanoid warriors ever known, during one of his many containment breaches. He led strike forces after a fleeing SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy reptile, after it escaped its acid tank and began charging towards the nearest populated area intent on causing mass death. He'd personally taken out more people than you've probably ever met, all at the behest of his Foundation superiors. And yet, standing right here before them, he couldn't help feel a twinge of deep terror. It was like staring right into the face of God and waiting for it to blink. With his well-honed military observation skills, he noted that O5-2 wasn't among the council this time, but he knew better than to ask why. He was employed to take orders, not to ask questions. And this time, his orders were something special. He wasn't given any more information than this. McGrath, we need you to lead an elite team to Astrakhan in Russia on the double. Procedure 006 is now in effect. You know what to do. McGrath nodded. He'd been prepared for this day. His predecessor, Commander Richards, had only needed to enact Procedure 006 once in his long and storied career with the Red Right Hand. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime assignment, and now the torch had been passed to him. The only question was whether he'd be up to the task. But McGrath didn't have time to ponder on this question. Time was of the essence. First, he needed to assemble a team, small but focused. Loyal men who'd keep their heads down, complete the mission, and take the forbidden knowledge no further than the bounds of said mission. McGrath selected 3 operatives, Bennett, DiMaggio, and Stewart, all of whom had proven valuable assets in prior missions. They would be the ones to accompany him on this most valuable and secretive of directives, Procedure 006. But before they could execute the mission itself, they needed to be trained, briefed, and fitted with the proper equipment. For a mission this sensitive and dealing with an anomaly as deadly as SCP-006, they needed to wear modified Class 6 BNC suits. These are the ultimate total exclusion hazmat suits, designed specifically by the SCP Foundation. They offered such a degree of protection that they made regular hazmat suits look like bikinis. Commander McGrath actually knew very little about SCP-006 and how it worked. Like many of the more top-secret anomalies contained by the Foundation, only the O5 Council understood the full scope of it. Everyone below them were only told the specific fragments of information they needed to do their job. After all, filling your head with the wrong kinds of knowledge can get your memory wiped, or worse, at the SCP Foundation. SCP-006, as far as Commander McGrath knew, was the more traditional kind of toxic. He'd been briefed using the SCP-006-B info pack, a heavily redacted description of SCP-006. Safe class, liquid in nature, but one of the most toxic substances known to man. It made mercury and uranium look like a glass of mineral water. And more dangerous still, if someone came into contact with even the tiniest quantity of SCP-006's liquids, they would not only be marked for certain death, they would also become a vector for transmission, a veritable plague rat, a walking danger to all mankind. That's why the Class 6 BNC suits needed to be tested. McGrath, Bennett, DiMaggio, and Stewart suited up in a secure Foundation training facility and fully submerged themselves in a training pool. This was how they made sure that there were no vulnerabilities in the suits. If any bubbles were generated, it meant there was a leak. And if there was a leak, then the person wearing the defective suit was as good as dead when they reached the real 006. Lucky for them, no leaks. They were ready to proceed to the next stage of the mission, making their way to Astrakhan, Russia, where SCP-006 was contained. The pressure was on, with the Council growing more impatient by the moment, so they needed to make the journey immediately. Every minute counted, and Commander McGrath was painfully aware of the time slipping away, though he couldn't possibly fathom why they'd need a toxic chemical like this with such urgency. They made their journey in a covert cargo plane. It was beyond important to keep all Foundation activity around SCP-006 under wraps. A number of groups of interest cells were active in the area, including the Church of the Broken God and the Serpent's Hand. And if ever the dreaded Chaos Insurgency caught wind of SCP-006's existence and triangulated its location, the damage it could do would be unprecedented. That's why nobody but the O5 Council could truly be trusted with this almost sacred knowledge. When they touched down in Astrakhan, they met with a Foundation courier who would take them on the final leg of their journey to the Foundation site, roughly 60 kilometers west of the town. McGrath and his team had no idea what they were headed towards, or the insane history of the land they traversed, all because of SCP-006. The Foundation had first become aware of the anomaly back during the 19th century, but were unable to gain control of it until 1991. Due to it being fiercely guarded by a procession of territorial Russian rulers. The blood of hundreds of thousands had been spilled on this land in the historic wars and conflicts over SCP-006. So many had wasted their entire lives unsuccessfully trying to find it. During the several-hour car trip to the site, Commander McGrath had no idea of the true value of the anomaly he and his small team were heading towards. But he would, in time, though an innocent would have to die first. The courier dropped the 4 operatives off outside an abandoned chemical plant in the sticks, far from what anyone would call civilization. It was the kind of industrial decay you could expect in the badlands of rural Russia, a huge complex weathered and broken by time. But what the untrained observer wouldn't realize is that the plant was actually full of heavily trained and even more heavily armed Foundation security personnel. As McGrath's team approached the building, they had no less than 8 sniper rifles pointed at them from various vantage points within the plant, just to be safe. The Foundation couldn't afford to take any chances with SCP-006. They arrived at the gate and provided their clearance credentials. They were envoys, here on behalf of the O5 Council themselves, and if they weren't allowed to complete their mission, then the 006 personnel would have the death of a council member on their hands. With that, the team was given a free pass into the site under close observation. Anyone seeking to interface SCP-006 was forced to do so under almost microscopic scrutiny. Even when inside the building, McGrath and his men needed to pass multiple secure checkpoints throughout the halls, each time restating their security credentials. Eventually, they reached a different section of the building. Foreboding anomalous hallways gave way to what seemed like a mix of a garden and a jungle, but the plants were different. The trees, the shrubs, even the weeds were unlike anything members of the team had ever seen before. It was like stepping into an alien world, or perhaps this world, but as it was a few million years prior, it was terrifying and wondrous. They suited up in their Class 6 BNC suits, fearing airborne contaminants from SCP-006 before proceeding further. They walked through this new jungle, being watched at every turn by security cameras and personnel posted throughout this overgrown portion of the facility. It didn't take long for them to reach their destination, the legendary SCP-006, a small natural spring jutting out of a rock, surrounded by rich emerald grass. It looked more like a nice place to have a picnic than a dangerous and highly secretive anomaly, but McGrath wasn't paid to question things, only to carry out Procedure 006. The only object they had with them was the quad sealant container, an ultra-secure liquid containment unit specifically designed for safely transporting samples of SCP-006's water between sites. The team members descended into the spring and began filling up the container. It was nerve-wracking, knowing the stakes of their mission, and knowing that they were submerged in such a deadly substance, but they had a job to do, and they were going to do it, come hell or high water. They filled the containment unit, but sadly for McGrath and his team, the mission wouldn't be entirely without casualty. A single bubble rose from the leg of Stewart's suit. He was a good MTF operative, but the youngest and least experienced member of the team. His suit must have somehow been damaged during transit, and now he was compromised. He shared a haunting glance with McGrath and his fellow team members, knowing that his part of the mission and his life was about to come to a swift and violent end. Alarms rang out across the facility. A huge team of armed operatives, all wearing Class 6 BNC suits, charged into the room. Stewart was grabbed and manhandled out of the 006 spring, while his fellow team members sealed the containment unit and continued their mission. There was no time to stop, rest, or mourn. Completing the mission was the absolute priority. If McGrath understood the protocol as well as he thought he did, Stewart would be dragged into a secure room by the site staff and locked in with a blast door. He would look down and notice the floor below him was a metal grate caked with ash. His last thoughts as the incinerator launches its flames into action would strangely be the fact that he was feeling the healthiest he'd been in years. But that wouldn't stop the sudden furnace around him from decimating his body and leaving little more than ash and charred bones. Over a decade of loyal MTF service ended in an instant. Stewart would have been terminated. According to orders from the top, it was all that could be done for those afflicted by SCP-006. A mercy, really, if they were to be believed. McGrath and his team soldiered on. After retrieving the sample, they were hurried back into their inception point, one of the many classified bases occupied by the O5 Council members. While DiMaggio and Bennett were ushered off to be given amnestic treatment, McGrath would personally get to see the containment unit and its precious cargo make the final leg of the journey. He was going to be granted access to O5-2, the person this had all been in service of. Commander McGrath approached the secure quarters of the council member, escorted by a bevy of heavily armed security personnel. The doors open and he saw her there, O5-2. Bedridden, laying at the center of a grand web of life-saving technology. She was beyond old and decrepit. Commander McGrath could see the centuries she'd endured written deeply in the wrinkles and scars of her ancient face. She didn't look like one of the most powerful people in the world. She looked like one of the most feeble. Her eyes lit up when McGrath entered the room holding the containment unit. She beckoned him closer, until he was close enough for her to take the containment unit from him with scarred, trembling hands. McGrath watched in horror as she disengaged the lid and swigged down the entirety of its contents. But wasn't the water toxic? He thought. McGrath had been fed the same lie as everybody else. The Foundation didn't keep 006 such a well-guarded secret because it was capable of bringing death. Quite the opposite, in fact. All Commander McGrath could do was stare awestruck as the years seemed to fall from O5-2's face. Decades and decades and decades. Scars faded, wrinkles disappeared. Little by little, O5-2 began to sit and then stand. By the time she was straightening her clothes, she looked like a healthy woman in her mid-40s. It was a complete and total transformation. The liquid of SCP-006 has a plethora of benefits to human subjects. The ability to regenerate damaged DNA by heightened excitement of cellular duplication and producing a frightening increase in the effectiveness of the human immune system. Even upon testing the liquid on animal subjects, hostile bacteria and viral agents were destroyed immediately. Members of the O5 Council are experts at cheating death, and SCP-006 is just another ace hidden up their sleeve in the endless battle against the Reaper. A secret so well guarded that they're willing to terminate even their most loyal servants to keep it safe. After all, if everyone knew about it, everyone would want it. And the O5 Council are very invested in exclusivity. Never normally one to rise above his station, Commander McGrath couldn't help blurt out, "But if it was all a lie, Private Stewart is perfectly alive." All smoke and mirrors, you see. And like everyone who works a 006 mission, he won't remember a thing. Good work, Commander McGrath. O5-2, now in perfect health, replied. Now return to your post after a visit to our boys in amnestics. There's still plenty to be done and we can't afford to dilly-dally. After all, you're not getting any younger.
Can a thought be infectious? Is it possible that transferring an idea can happen as easily as catching the common cold? Someone gets it, then transmits it to another person who then passes it on to someone else and so on. Imagine for a moment that information is a disease. We can't see information or feel it,
We can read it in books or on the internet, but actually seeing it or feeling it inside our heads is impossible. So what if something could taint the information we absorb? Use it to slip its way undetected into your mind, then pass from you to your friends, your family, your coworkers. How would you know it was there? And how could you prevent it from getting into your head? Perhaps it's time you were introduced to SCP-3002. Over its many years of studying and containing anomalous beings and entities, the SCP Foundation has encountered a number of creatures with memetic abilities. If you are unfamiliar with the term, memetic usually refers to data or information that has been manipulated in order to influence or subconsciously change a person's behavior. This can take any form, from text and images to spoken phrases and other audio. For example, a form of memetic influence we have all experienced at some point is product placement. If you ever watched a character in a movie or on TV using a certain product, then that may have made you decide that you want to buy that same product for yourself. That idea was planted in your head by something you saw and had a subliminal influence on your behavior. SCP-3002 is one such entity that uses memetic stimuli for its own nefarious purposes. Some anomalies, like SCP-2440, use memetic information to spread knowledge of themselves among human beings, getting stronger the more people learn about it. SCP-3002, on the other hand, is information. This entity is a thought, a living, sentient thought, with a number of abilities that allow it to influence the minds of human beings. It is hard to picture a thought, let alone one that is alive. Since we can't see information, the idea of something so abstract having a tangible form boggles the mind. SCP-3002 is capable of shapeshifting, and while it does not possess its own consistent shape, the entity is able to transform itself into the form of any piece of information it chooses. Existing as pure information means that it is intangible to any beings that possess physical bodies. But what makes SCP-3002 a threat to everyone at the Foundation and earned this entity its Keter classification is its power to manipulate a person's mind or memories, allowing SCP-3002 to directly enter human minds. Moving at the speed that thoughts can travel through the brain, this entity is almost impossible to kill or kept contained. SCP-3002 can spread like a sickness through a human population, attacking new minds and taking control of its victims. According to the Foundation's research, there is only one way to remove the influence of SCP-3002. Anyone that comes under the control of this entity has to undergo complex, intricate, and risky brain surgery in order to physically remove the entity from their minds. However, the Foundation considers this method to be impractical, time-consuming, cost-ineffective, and is rendered utterly pointless if SCP-3002 has infected too much of a subject's mind. So instead, in order to prevent the spread of SCP-3002's influence, all Foundation personnel are instructed to terminate any person contaminated by this living thought. This order is extended to that individual's family, friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances. Given that SCP-3002 can take the form of any information it chooses, written words, a sound, even a telepathic signal, anyone even remotely linked to someone the entity infects has to be destroyed to stop any potential spread. If you or anyone you knew were to come into contact with SCP-3002, the entity would be able to take control of your entire consciousness. All your memories would be ripe for the entity's picking. SCP-3002 is able to sift through your temporal lobe where memories are stored, and can not only destroy and delete an infected person's memories, but can also create false memories to replace them. And all the while, you would be completely unaware that this was happening to you, stripped of all your natural survival instincts while SCP-3002 runs riot in your brain. There is currently no known limit to how much of someone's mind SCP-3002 is able to mimic, rewrite, alter, or remove. When the entity alters one of your memories, that memory will become an additional instance of SCP-3002. In other words, it can implant itself in every moment of your life, making itself a part of everything you remember about your own personal past and even the parts you can't. Once SCP-3002 has spread itself to every piece of information stored inside your brain, the next stage of infection begins, and SCP-3002 is able to take full control of a person's body. Much like before, this could be happening to you without you ever being consciously aware of it. Usually this doesn't come to much, and infected victims will carry on their day-to-day lives, acting no different to how they would normally. That is, until SCP-3002 detects a new target that hasn't been infected yet. When this happens, any people previously exposed to SCP-3002 will collectively seek out the uncontaminated individual, capturing them. Once this happens, SCP-3002's infected army will force their new victim to join them. The SCP Foundation considers SCP-3002 to be extremely hostile and a major threat to their organization and the world at large. Due to SCP-3002 being uncontainable and able to infinitely adapt, it has evaded capture or termination for a considerable length of time. Having the ability to spread among human beings via the information we share with each other, speech, texts, emails, phone calls, any information at all, means that potentially any and all information could contain SCP-3002. According to calculations of the Foundation's top researchers, 78% of humanity may be under the influence of SCP-3002 without any awareness that they have been infected. While dangerous and unstoppable, SCP-3002 doesn't operate purely on instinct. It doesn't infect as many minds as it can just because it knows no other way. Everything that SCP-3002 does is a premeditated, calculated decision with one nefarious intention, one goal: to destroy the SCP Foundation from the inside out by killing or infecting every member of personnel. Believe it or not, SCP-3002 didn't begin life as a sentient, infectious thought. In fact, SCP-3002 was once a person, a regular human being like you or I. She even had a name, Lily Veselka. It is widely believed that Lily Veselka became what we now know as SCP-3002 due to the actions of the Foundation itself. Since becoming SCP-3002, Lily seems to have been searching for any information she can find regarding a highly secret operation conducted by the SCP Foundation known as Project Lethe. As well as this, she appears to have an interest in a number of Foundation research facilities, including Site E and an off-the-books facility located in Ukraine's Yuseninsky National Park. This is potentially where SCP-3002 was first created. If any of this is to be believed, then it would certainly explain SCP-3002's noticeable aggression towards the Foundation, and its attempts to infect its personnel as an act of revenge. After the project that turned Lily into a living thought, SCP-3002 was later encountered by the Foundation in its current form in South Rock Penitentiary. This prison, located near Lafayette, Indiana, was first visited by one Dr. Daryl Lloyd, one of the SCP Foundation's researchers. The prison psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Suzanne Fairbank, was the first to notice the effects of SCP-3002 contamination on a number of South Rock Penitentiary's inmates. During sessions with her, several of these prisoners had mentioned an identical memory to Dr. Fairbank. The description of the memory from each of the inmates followed the same structure. The prisoner remembered taking a long walk through a forest with their best friend at the time. This detail, the best friend, is most likely SCP-3002 herself, imitating a figure from each inmate's own childhood memories. At some point in this false shared memory, all the prisoners recalled having an argument with their friend. It was later learned that the figure was Lily Veselka, approaching infected individuals in their memories to ask them questions about the project that had turned her into SCP-3002, often demanding to know, "What do you know about me?" or "Has the project finished?" The Foundation began to investigate this bizarre instance of shared anomalous memory after Dr. Suzanne Fairbank shared her findings on an internet message board, describing what she had witnessed to other psychology experts. At first, Dr. Lloyd, the Foundation's researcher sent to South Rock to gather more information, labeled the situation as low-priority research. Given SCP-3002's ability to adapt and take the form of any information, it was able to avoid immediate detection by the SCP Foundation, and the full extent of Lily's abilities remained hidden. Dr. Lloyd originally classified SCP-3002 as safe, believing it was a little more than a shared childhood memory that the South Rock inmates had described. At first, those that had been infected with this collective memory were able to recount it with perfect accuracy. But as Dr. Lloyd continued to interview and test the affected inmates, the details became scarier, and the memory became less and less defined the further the SCP Foundation looked into it. Perhaps Lily recognized the Foundation's presence and remembered that they were the ones responsible for turning her into a sentient mimetic entity without physical form, and started hiding her tracks. Maybe she was biding herself time, hiding herself away in the minds of the infected prisoners until the time was right. Little did Dr. Lloyd realize at the time just how far SCP-3002's influence had already spread. Lily wasn't just in the inmates' heads, but almost all of the prison staff too, who were now spreading her further and further without even realizing it. Thinking that SCP-3002 would be easy to contain, Dr. Lloyd had the Foundation administer amnestics to all the infected inmates. Amnestics are memory-altering drugs that the SCP Foundation uses to prevent any information about SCPs becoming known to the public. When dealing with mimetic anomalies like SCP-3002 or SCP-2440, amnestics can be particularly useful in removing a person's memories about a mimetic SCP. Dr. Lloyd hoped that this would be the case at South Rock, still thinking SCP-3002 was nothing more than an anomalous shared memory that could be removed. However, removing the false memory that Lily had implanted in the prisoners would not remove her from all their other memories. Additionally, one of the infected inmates was not given amnestics and was brought back to the Foundation for observation. From there, SCP-3002's influence had been able to spread like a sickness through the ranks of the Foundation's own personnel, without their knowledge or detection. Every person whose mind SCP-3002 is able to reach becomes an unwitting carrier for the infectious living thought. It is unknown exactly how many of the SCP Foundation's members are under the control of SCP-3002, granting Lily access to the wealth of secret information and plans that the Foundation keeps hidden. It doesn't matter what level of clearance someone would need to view it. If it's information, it's another way for SCP-3002 to spread. And information, as we know, can take any form, be it a written file, a spoken conversation, or even an informative YouTube video. Now tell me again about the time that we took a walk together in the forest. Think back to your childhood and ask yourself, what was the most pain you've ever felt while growing up? As we develop, our understanding of pain evolves according to our different experiences. The older we get, the injuries we suffered as children, like a scraped knee or a bee sting, rarely cause us the same level of distress as they used to. Of course, when you are young and unfamiliar with sensations of pain, what you really need in that moment straight after you've fallen off your bike or tripped playing soccer is someone to pick you back up and give your sore spot a kiss. Perhaps you even need a bowl of warm soup to comfort you. Luckily for you, SCP-348 is exactly that. While many of the anomalies held in containment by the SCP Foundation have earned the Euclid or infamous Keter class designations, SCP-348 is one of the few considered to be safe, both in the sense it poses no containment risk, and in that it wouldn't hurt a fly. It is neither an ancient eldritch abomination from another dimension spreading its influence in our world through mimetic stimuli, nor is it a recording of a basketball game in which all the players and spectators are trapped inside. It isn't an indestructible limb-generating reptile or a towering winged being wielding a flaming sword and guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden. To put it simply, SCP-348 is a bowl. A white ceramic bowl, the kind you would find almost anywhere in the world. It may even look indistinguishable from the one in your kitchen cabinet. Of course, SCP-348 is hardly as ordinary as it outwardly appears to be, and it certainly isn't the only inanimate object that the Foundation keeps safely stored away. The key thing that differentiates SCP-348 from most other anomalies is how genuinely harmless it is. Its anomalous properties do not cause injury to any individual that interacts with it, nor does this bowl have any adverse effects on the world around it. SCP-348 cannot bend or reshape reality. It does not cause the person eating from it to have premonitions of their own death, and using it certainly does not manifest a contract-making entity at the opposite side of the table. So what makes this bowl in any way anomalous? What about it categorizes it as an SCP and not just a harmless piece of fine crockery? Well, why don't we start with how SCP-348 was first discovered? Some time ago, the SCP Foundation was made aware of rumors surrounding a child living in an unknown part of the world. According to the intelligence gathered by the Foundation, this child seemed to possess some sort of healing ability, or at least this is what rumors suggested. Upon further investigation, the source of these so-called remarkable recovery abilities wasn't the child, but appeared to come from a small ceramic bowl, which we now know as SCP-348. This is not to say that the bowl has any inherently supernatural healing properties, and it doesn't impart any regenerative power to those that eat from it either. It does heal in a certain sense, but not in the way you're probably imagining. When the SCP Foundation recovered SCP-348, there were no markings on it indicating where the bowl came from or who it was manufactured by. The only visually distinct details worthy of note were flowery patterns that appeared to be hand-painted around both the inside and outside of SCP-348. The ceramic surface also bore the Chinese letters Shang Xini, which translates to the phrase, "thinking of you." The child that first discovered it found the ceramic bowl in the attic of their home. The child's parents were both full-time workers and seemed to be somewhat neglectful of their child, although they refused to comment on this. But according to the findings of the SCP Foundation, the child had come to rely on SCP-348. Deciding to further investigate the anomalous properties of SCP-348, the Foundation began testing it, given that the child who first discovered the bowl had relied upon it. Tests involve Foundation researchers presenting certain children to SCP-348 and observing the results. So was this bowl haunted? Perhaps harboring some malicious spirit or entity that sought to corrupt these children, maybe even healing them in order to somehow use them as a vessel to break into our world? No. And while it may have not healed in any overt or expected way, it did heal in at least a metaphorical sense. If presented with an injured child sporting any form of minor ailment such as a cut or a runny nose, SCP-348 fills with warm soup. And yes, that's right, we said soup. What kind, you may ask? Well, that seems to vary. Sometimes it is tomato soup, other times it might be chicken noodle soup. While the ingredients used in the soups are often different, there are notable consistencies to how SCP-348 heals. If anyone between the ages of 4 years old and 18 years old sits down in front of the blue flowered bowl, then SCP-348 will fill with soup. Numerous young test subjects brought in by the Foundation to eat from this particular bowl of soup have reported that they enjoyed their meal, usually finishing the entire bowl when permitted to by research staff. Many of the injured children that were tested have stated that the soup they eat from SCP-348 reminds them of their parents' cooking. These children have expressed contentment and feelings of comfort after acquiring their various cuts and bruises. Some even claim that even though they were in a room all alone, they didn't feel lonely when they were eating the soup. And all the anomalous properties don't end after a child finishes the soup. Usually, although not always, the bowl will leave the child a message, often some brief words of reassurance or comfort. These messages materialize on the inside rim of the bowl and seem to be specifically tailored to the subject that has just eaten. The words will not only be written in the child's first language, but are often linked to the child's home life or relationship with their parents. Messages that appear on SCP-348 usually fade over time, normally disappearing after a few hours or when the bowl refills with more soup. One test of SCP-348 saw a little girl, age 8 and suffering from a sore throat, brought before the bowl. According to a background screening made by research personnel, the girl lived with her biological parents and apparently had a good relationship with both her mother and her father. When SCP-348 filled with soup for her, the girl took almost half an hour to finish eating, and afterwards reported that she felt her sore throat get better as she ate. By the end of the meal, this test subject remarked that she felt completely normal. In this instance, no message appeared within the bowl. Another child was brought in to continue the testing of SCP-348, this time a boy of 10. Unlike the previous test, this boy was not on good terms with his parents and often argued with them. At the time of testing, the boy had sustained several minor bruises, the result of a small accident that occurred while the boy had been out riding his bike. Much like the little girl, this subject ate the soup that SCP-348 presented him with. This time though, the bowl offered a message to the boy. The lettering found on the ceramic surface of SCP-348 simply read, "Don't forget to brush." Messages also appeared when an 11-year-old boy with a slight cold ate soup from the bowl. This child had been adopted by a foster family, and after eating from SCP-348, he saw the message, "I'm glad you're happy," appear. Another young test subject, a boy age 6, had a similar experience. In this instance, the child had several scrapes and scratches from playing with his friends. His parents had divorced, and he was living with his mother at the time of testing. This time, SCP-348's message to this boy read, "I'm sorry, son." A 7-year-old girl suffering from a cough was brought in before SCP-348. She had lost her father to a traffic accident some time before testing commenced, and received the message, "I love you," after finishing her soup. Further testing conducted by the Foundation revealed that anyone over the age of 18 years who attempted to eat soup from SCP-348 experienced things slightly differently. Unlike the children, older subjects mostly displayed a disinterest in finishing their meal. A common complaint among those over 18 was that the soup was missing something. However, in a few isolated cases, testing SCP-348 on older candidates still revealed messages, although the words seemed to be faded, not the clear hand-painted blue that appeared when the children had finished their soup. One woman aged 30 who was suffering from a headache sat down in front of SCP-348. Much like it had done before, the bowl filled with soup and the woman ate. As with some of the younger subjects, a key aspect of this woman's background seemed to be what triggered the message to appear. Specifically, she admitted to being on bad terms with her mother and father. The woman explained that she had opted to live on her own, isolating herself from her family. In fact, she even described having rejected an offer her father made to her many years earlier, refusing some career training that he was willing to give in order to help her secure a job. When she finished the soup, one word appeared in the bowl: "Why?" Another woman who was 40 years old was also brought in for the SCP-348 testing. Much like the previous subject, she had moved away from home and became estranged from her parents over the years. But unlike the previous test, this woman had taken it upon herself to not only send money to her parents, but also arrange senior care for both as well. Prior to testing, her father had died peacefully of natural causes after spending his last days in the care that this woman had paid for. As the woman ate the soup from the bowl, she remarked about its apparently bitter taste, but also described her meal as fulfilling. After she had finished, the words "thank you" appeared within SCP-348. One other adult subject that produced a noticeable result from SCP-348 was a 40-year-old male. The results of this test appeared to be the most distinctly different from any previous adult or child. By now, researchers working for the SCP Foundation had determined that familial history seemed to play an important role in the outcome of any interaction with SCP-348, and this individual was certainly different to most. The man in question had murdered his father roughly a year before the testing took place. He began the test with SCP-348 while afflicted with aches in his back. After one taste of the soup that appeared in the bowl before him, the murderer was immediately repulsed. He complained about the taste, refusing to eat any more from SCP-348. Shortly after, the man began to experience severe stomach pain. The potentially poisonous soup was disposed of, but SCP-348 immediately filled with salt water, which took 3 hours to disappear from the bowl. Despite conducting numerous tests with subjects of all ages and ailments, the SCP Foundation researchers have so far been unable to determine the origins of the messages that sometimes appear in SCP-348. Some have theorized because of the family histories of some children and adults tested, that the words somehow come from the father of whoever eats the soup, since even when a subject's father is alive or present in their life, the message seems to convey feelings that their father has or would have. Other researchers claim that this is just the purpose of SCP-348, to provide comfort to small children dealing with pain, both inside and out. After all, isn't providing comfort what a good bowl of soup, anomalous or not, is best at?
Site Director Tilda Moose was staring down the barrel of the gun that would cause the apocalypse, and SCP-6000 was pulling back the hammer.
Typically someone as important as the site director of Site-19, the Foundation's largest containment site, would never be put on a mission as risky as accompanying MTF Sigma-3, aka the Bibliographers, right into the heart of an active anomaly. But these were extraordinary circumstances to say the least. Dr. Moose and the operatives of MTF Sigma-3 Fireteam Chicago entered Brazilian airspace in late December of the year 2030. Below them, an ocean of trees, the Amazon rainforest, known to some as the lung of the world, and the lung had a cancer known as SCP-6000. Director Moose could see it on the horizon, beautiful and terrifying, like a huge shimmering scar on the jungle's canopy. It had been identified a few days earlier via live satellite imaging, opening up like a wound in the world's largest rainforest, and it was growing, swallowing up and affecting entire areas of land by the kilometer. Not wanting to waste any more time, the Foundation immediately sent in a recon team to gather the first intel on this rapidly developing anomaly. Once inside the affected area, known to the Foundation as the Exclusion Zone, they discovered unprecedented phenomena. The flora and fauna of the rainforest had been altered drastically in the affected areas. Trees appeared to be somehow naturally carved into living bookshelves, their leaves tattooed with words. Huge alien birds soared above the forest with their paper-like wings, also covered in text. Spotted jaguars with 6 or even 8 limbs, like a freakish crossbreeding of animal and insect, lopped through the papery thickets in hunt of word-covered prey. Every living creature in the forest had been transformed by SCP-6000, and it was about to get a whole lot worse. If SCP-6000's exclusion zone continued to expand, not only would the anomalous effects prolong, but they'd increase in their intensity, mutating everything SCP-6000 touched, reaching further and further across the landscape. The Foundation needed to gather all the intel they possibly could on this emerging anomaly before it was too late, but time was beginning to run out. Just as they began to gain traction, the Foundation suddenly lost contact with the initial reconnaissance team. They seemed to have fallen off the map, vanished. This triggered the immediate deployment of subsequent expeditions into the SCP-6000 exclusion zone. When the Bibliographers' first strike team arrived on the scene of the exclusion zone's bizarre alien world in search of the missing reconnaissance team, they found the most strange and damning discovery yet. A creature who would soon come to be known as SCP-6000-A. Much like the exclusion zone itself, she was both terrifying and beautiful. Half maiden, half monster. A sleeping woman with skin covered in scales, her legs replaced by the huge coiling tail of a python. She was reminiscent of the mythical Nagas or Gorgons, and thankfully for all the MTF members in attendance, she was already in a sort of unconscious state when they happened upon her. Perhaps even more bizarre than the creature herself was the question of what on earth had been going on around her. She was found at the base of a mutated tree, already halfway transformed into a bookcase. There were several large stones placed in a circle around her, each one covered in thaumaturgic symbols written in what was presumably human blood, as though some strange ritual had recently been performed. But the most notable detail of all was the fact that she was surrounded by 12 corpses. Though they remain unidentified to this day, there is one thing about the corpses that was clear. They were all wearing dark robes. It didn't take the Foundation's brightest minds to calculate the connection. Figures in robes performing strange rituals, anomalous creatures everywhere, the sudden appearance of a multitude of anomalous books, and a decidedly serpentine entity. This had to be somehow related to the Serpent's Hand, an infamous group of interest that takes a hard stance on defying the Foundation's secrecy and revealing the truth about anomalies to the world. While still comatose, SCP-6000-A was secured and taken back to be contained in Facility 57, while Sigma-3 Fireteam Chicago suited up and prepared for their first trip into the exclusion zone. Among them, of course, was Site-19 Director Tilda Moose. So let's answer the big question on everyone's mind right now. Why send someone as important as a site director into a potentially hazardous environment where an entire reconnaissance team had already gone missing and the Serpent's Hand were believed to still be operating? Because nobody at the Foundation understands the Serpent's hand quite like Director Moose. After all, in another life before joining the SCP Foundation, she worked with them. To the Foundation, cooperative ex-GOI members are worth their weight in gold. And in a situation like this, nobody could possibly be more valuable than Director Moose. She knew the way, and we mean that literally. All signs pointed to SCP-6000 being the largest and most unstable Class W gateway that the Foundation has ever discovered. But you might be more familiar with the concept of Class W gateways when they're referred to simply as the Ways, the entrances into and out of the Wanderer's Library. The legendary extra-dimensional location that exists as a nexus between various realities that has become a kind of unofficial headquarters for the Serpent's Hand. Director Moose had used the Ways before to enter and gain access to the Wanderer's Library back when she was one of the Hands, but even she admitted that she'd never seen anything quite like SCP-6000. When they touched down and Director Moose first saw the environment around them, the shelves, the books, the pages, the text, she felt a powerful sense of déjà vu. It was just like the library, but something was wrong. The way here was not a standard dimensional doorway. It was more like a kind of open wound, and the Wanderer's Library was spilling out of it and into our world. Given the raw cosmic power of the library, it was bound to twist our world into its own image, not the other way around. There was only one thing to do from here. With Director Moose leading at the head, they would use this vast new way to travel into the heart of the Wanderer's Library itself and search for answers. After all, the library is said to contain all knowledge across the multiverse, so presumably it would grant them the solution they needed to the SCP-6000 dilemma they were faced with. But getting answers from the library, especially if you work for the SCP Foundation, is easier said than done. As Fireteam Chicago made their way further into SCP-6000, they reached an area that Director Moose could at least recognize as the true Wanderer's Library. The dirt gave way to wood paneling beneath their feet. The air shimmered like an oil slick. Mutated trees gave way to giant empty bookcases, like they were witnessing the birth of a new expansion. As soon as they arrived and began venturing through the labyrinthian corridors of the Wanderer's Library, the library's inhabitants took notice. Surprised that the library has some permanent residents? Don't be. After all, you can hardly have a library without librarians. As only people with experience like Director Moose know, the Wanderer's Library has an enormous contingent of creatures known as librarians and archivists permanently wandering their halls, arranging the books and protecting the location from threats. Threats like Fireteam Chicago. The team had their weapons at the ready when they first saw the creatures appearing all around them. Director Moose noticed a giant red millipede skittering around the hall past them, an archivist. It didn't appear actively threatening, but its presence already was a bad sign. Then a feminine hissing voice rang out through the air. It said, "I see your intentions. Be gone." Something about it communicated a dark and infinite power. And with that, more nightmarish librarians entered the scene. Huge spider-like beings with countless limbs. Class 3 librarians began crawling down the bookcases towards them. But there was something different about these creatures. Something even worse. They were wearing the uniform of the reconnaissance team. In fact, once upon a time, they were the reconnaissance team. But their stories had taken a drastic turn since they got involved with SCP-6000. Something the rest of the world would soon be able to relate to. Just seeing this terrified Moose. It wasn't unheard of for the library to transform people into librarians, but that was typically a punishment reserved for people who commit only the gravest offenses against the anomaly. What had caused the Wanderer's Library to become so actively aggressive? They didn't have time to think about it because things were getting worse. As the Class 3 librarians reached the bottom of the bookcase, they began to give chase, leading to Fireteam Chicago desperately fleeing the scene. But they weren't fast enough. The creatures began to attack, tackling and slaughtering members of the team. The survivors fired back, but this led to even more aggression from the librarians. Soon, a group of Class 2 librarians, giant hooded beings wielding lanterns, began to join the chase. What started as a highly organized mission soon became a massacre. The Foundation operatives were hopelessly outnumbered by the library's legion of obedient monsters. They could not fight and win. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Director Moose was lucky to escape with her life, and in response to the newly assessed severity of the SCP-6000 threat, a wider barrage of containment methods, known as Project Fusillade, was initiated. This meant making Facility 57 the official containment site of SCP-6000. This also resulted in the deployment of active arrest warrants put on all active Serpent's Hand cells, as well as giving MTF Sigma-3 blanket permissions to aggressively use any means of force against the Wanderer's Library's growing aggression. But trouble was already brewing back at Facility 57. SCP-6000-A had awakened, an attempt to attack the Foundation personnel around it. When it, or rather, she, was safely recontained, Director Moose volunteered to interview her firsthand. She hoped that the creature might at least have some information about what was going on with SCP-6000. When the interrogation began, 6000-A referred to Director Moose as a jailer, the Serpent's Hand expression for members of the SCP Foundation. From this, Moose could easily recognize that 6000-A had once been a member of the Hand, a human too, but she'd been changed into her current form by a far more powerful being, the Serpent, the great entity that rules the Wanderer's Library and the very namesake of the Serpent's Hand. A being as old as the universe, the queen of all knowledge, and a kind of god in her own right. In a sense, Director Moose had a standing grudge with the Serpent. Back when she was a member of the Hand, Moose was thirsty for knowledge. She craved stories, but always frustrated by the fact that they had to end. She stole sacred texts from the archive of the Wanderer's Library and ensured that she would never truly be welcome again. As the interview ended, 6000-A promised to continue looking through the stories of the library, hoping that the answer to their struggles would perhaps be hidden within. Meanwhile, as SCP-6000 continued its aggressive expansion through the Amazon, mutating and consuming more land, the efforts of Project Fusillade subsequently escalated as well. In one of the largest coordinated efforts in Foundation history, Operation Black Star, mobile task forces on every continent conducted a simultaneous raid on every single known Serpent's Hand hotspot worldwide, and they found nothing. Every single base was empty. All over the world, not a single member of the Serpent's Hand could be found. It was roundly concluded that they'd all returned through the world's various ways into the Wanderer's Library, like a mothership that was calling them all home. The Serpent's Hand, the only people who might have known what was coming, were escaping the planet. As far as bad signs go, this was probably the worst one possible. The proverbial rats fleeing the ship. And if the library wanted its servants to leave the Earth, it stood to reason that the Serpent had something horrible planned for everyone and everything left on it. Not long after this, Director Moose decided to deliver a grim statement to the O5 Council about SCP-6000, informing them of the gravity of this new situation. I don't know what precipitated this, but if the libraries turned against humanity, the situation is going to be dire. It's a completely alien entity to us. We can't even begin to understand why it is or does the thing it does. Hell, we don't even know if there's a rhyme or reason to anything. Most Foundation personnel only know of the library in the abstract, but I and a handful of others have actually stepped foot in the shelves, and we can tell you that it is humanity's greatest blessing and its greatest threat all at the same time. Imagine how much history has been influenced by people getting into the library and bringing back knowledge they would otherwise never have had. Now imagine if the source of all knowledge in the universe turns on us. I don't see this story having a happy ending. In spite of her grim prognosis, Director Moose couldn't give up. In fact, she was relieved of her duties as Site-19 director in order to pursue the SCP-6000 case and subvert the library apocalypse full-time, seeing as it seemed she was the only high-ranking member of Foundation personnel who truly understood what was going on. She and the rest of the Project Fusillade Incident Committee scrambled to find ways to destroy SCP-6000, or at least put a halt to its rampant growth. They sent in legions of mobile task forces with flame and heat-based weaponry, trying to burn down all of the mutated trees. However, the trees showed an almost complete resistance to this method, with burnt matter quickly regenerating after the fact. In an even more savage act of war against the Wanderer's Library itself, they fired a high-yield explosive into the mouth of SCP-6000. However, the second the bomb passed the threshold into the library, its effects were immediately nullified. These concerning developments led to Moose and her team finally pulling out the big gun. Literally, the biggest gun there is, the Arcturus Array. A giant satellite-mounted laser cannon, only called in for the most dire situations due to its huge potential for collateral damage. However, when they fired the array's beam down onto SCP-6000 at full power, it remained utterly unaffected. These were just 3 of the 34 different failed attempts by Project Fusillade to put an end to the library's rampage before it could keep expanding, and eventually destroy the Earth. In a fit of desperation, Moose returned once again to SCP-6000-A, hoping she would have more answers. They needed a miracle to stop this thing from becoming an XK-class scenario. At first, the imprisoned snake woman was cryptic. Instead of giving Moose useful information, she told her the true origin of the Serpent's hand. They were once a cult devoted to the Serpent herself, warriors on behalf of knowledge incarnate. The modern Serpent's hand, which claims to be comparatively secular, is little more than a shadow of what it used to be, but they still perform the same basic task, destroying secrecy and advancing knowledge. As Moose's patience wore thin, she asked the snake whether she had any specific stories about how the Foundation could beat a library gone mad, but the snake told her there were no such stories. She did, however, surrender one vital piece of information, saying, "All the stories I see with the Foundation staring down the end of the world, they have the book burners by their side. I suppose there's something to say there. Rivals allying themselves against a threat greater than either could imagine. Smoking ash, a fusillade of fire against a wall of trees." There it was, Fusillade, the namesake of Moose's project against SCP-6000, which the snake would have no way of knowing about. This was it. This was the one narrative thread that could lead them to their salvation. But there was one other deal that caught Moose's well-trained eye as well: the book burners. Better known to the SCP Foundation and to you as the Global Occult Coalition, one of the Foundation's most bitter rivals in the field of combating the strange. But this time, would it be worth putting aside their differences to face the greatest threat in their shared history? Could the Foundation and the GOC together be the fusillade that holds back the library's terrifying advance once and for all? The O5 Council held a vote on whether the Foundation should get the GOC involved. After much deliberation, the motion was approved by a narrow 3-vote margin. An emergency envoy from the Foundation was immediately sent to GOC headquarters in Germany to invite them to become a part of Project Fusillade and stop SCP-6000 expansion before it was too late. After comprehending the full scope of the situation and finally coming to understand just how incredibly dangerous SCP-6000 was, the leaders of the GOC approved this historic high-level partnership. GOC Physics, Psyche, and Ptolemy Division personnel were transported to Facility 57 for briefing on the developing situation. If they were lucky, they weren't too late to stop this XK-class end-of-the-world scenario from unfolding into completion. Interestingly, the GOC, prior to the SCP-6000 incident, had actually conducted more successful raids into the Wanderer's library than even the Foundation had. So it was natural that, soon after they became officially involved, the O5 Council and GOC Command authorized another mission into the library, with GOC Strike Team 9842 Probable Cause codenamed Harbor, in order to discover more about the situation from within. Director Moose and one of her closest associates, Agent Adam Macmillan, another former Serpent's Hand turned Foundation agent, would instruct the team via live video and audio link. Supplied with state-of-the-art GOC and Foundation equipment, the Harbor team entered the exclusion zone. They couldn't help but remark on the extraordinary sights before them. A shimmering technicolor fantasy, filled with trees halfway transformed into bookcases. But strangely, all of the books within them were utterly blank. Following the instructions delivered by Moose and Macmillan, the Harbor team advanced further, until they found an area where the forest properly converged into the library itself. Much like Fire Team Chicago had been, the Harbor Strike Team was baffled to find that this new, expanding wing of the library didn't seem to have any books inside its endless bookcases.
The team remained discreet as roving librarians patrolled the halls and skittered about high above them. Security in the Wanderer's library had grown exponentially. Eventually, Harbor found the first book of the new wing, a slim volume entitled simply, In Progress, much like SCP-6000's takeover of the world outside. But before they could relay the knowledge within the book back to Moose and Macmillan, the voice of the Serpent herself once again sounded. She asked the two members of the Harbor Strike Team why they were there, and when they claimed to simply be following orders from their commanders, the all-powerful knowledge deity accused them of lying. The Strike Team members trembled in fear. Moments later, the two operatives were claimed by the library, much like the SCP Foundation recon team before them. The signal link between Harbor and Command was severed. They were gone. The Foundation and the GOC's first joint venture against SCP-6000 had been useless, but that wasn't the worst part. The library's unprecedented counterattack was about to ruin everything that the two groups had been trying to achieve over their entire existence. SCP-6000 began putting out radio signals, but it wasn't just 6000 itself. Every single abandoned Serpent's Hand cell all over the globe suddenly began transmitting and boosting the signal as well. It was too big and too coordinated for even the combined efforts of the Foundation and the Coalition to get a handle on. The signal was the voice of the Serpent herself, hissing, "The garden is the Serpent's place." And a lot of people heard it. Governments, organizations, and individuals all over the world picked up the signal and its ultimate source, the Amazon rainforest. As millions of people began to turn their attention to the Amazon, their eyes were drawn to one thing: SCP-6000 and its enormous shimmering oil slick expanding out over the canopy. Too big now for the Foundation and the GOC to keep under wraps anymore. The internet blew up with millions of posts and messages across every platform imaginable. Even the Foundation's web crawler was utterly overwhelmed. One forum poster said, "You guys see the pictures coming out of Brazil? MSN's probably gonna get a hold of it by tomorrow and suppress the story, but it's insane. I have no clue what the hell is going on in the Amazon, but the pictures make it look like some sort of oil slick. It's kinda beautiful." Another commented, "Yep, turns out I'm not nuts. My friends have been hearing it on their car radios and hams too. A woman's voice, sorta nasally, repeating numbers, coordinates I think, and the words, 'The garden is the Serpent's place.' Sounds biblical, maybe a passphrase of some sort?" Now here's the kicker. If you look on Google Earth or anything for the coordinates, everything's fine, it doesn't show anything out of the ordinary. But if you use a backdoor to get into the wildlife observation cameras scattered around, the cameras went offline immediately after, but I managed to save this image. Starting to think I should go down there. This could be big. But random people on the internet were just the tip of the iceberg. It didn't take long for all the classified information about SCP-6000 to fall into the hands of a number of mainstream media outlets. The Wall Street Journal ran it with the headline, "The Amazon Anomaly." Not long after, The Guardian released Brazil Under Lockdown, as the efforts of the Foundation and the GOC to keep a lid on things started to look more like a military coup than a routine quarantine effort. The horrors started to snowball. News about the strange activity in the Amazon led to a massive influx of tourists and amateur investigators attempting to gain access. While the Foundation and the GOC did what they could to hold people off and provide amnestics to those who were actually exposed, it wasn't enough. The cat was out of the bag, and now any attempts to cover up what had already been released felt like just another element of the conspiracy. Knowledge was spreading fast, and in trying to cover it up, both the Foundation and the GOC risked exposing even their own existences to the public in the process. The Serpent's plan had been working perfectly, it seemed. But this was more than a mere compromise of informational security. The increased global knowledge of SCP-6000 seemed to massively increase its expansion, as though it fed on people's knowledge of it. The exclusion zone grew by a terrifying 6 kilometers, and the mutations within its boundaries only seemed to intensify. Things that had gotten so severe that the Coalition's nuclear resources were being considered as a response to SCP-6000's aggression. Not long after this, Director Moose's closest confidant within Project Fusillade, Agent Macmillan, disappeared. Security footage of Facility 57 showed him performing a thaumaturgic ritual circle, similar to the one that had produced SCP-6000-A. The cameras captured an intense flash of light from the circle, and afterwards, Macmillan was gone. He left a note for Director Moose saying, "Sorry, Tilly.
I used to spend weeks amongst the library's shelves, perusing everything I could come across. It was otherworldly in the most literal sense of the word. I'm sure you understand the feeling. The difference is that you couldn't go in. You made the choice between the library and the Foundation. When I first entered, it was just a mission. I experienced something amazing, something well beyond what I thought was ever possible. And I thought it was a shame that we looked at something so magnificent and only worried about how it might hurt us. I can see now that's not the case. The librarians are only hurting people that try to stop the expansion. I have no intention of doing that. This is the end of the story, not the one where we somehow come up with a silver bullet to fix everything. The only thing I can do is change how I feel about it. I just want to sit amongst the shelves and see the false stars again. I think this is my happy ending. Director Moose certainly didn't see it that way. In spite of everything, she was still desperately searching for that elusive silver bullet, the secret to stopping SCP-6000 and reversing the horrific damage it had already wrought. They were the SCP Foundation. They always found a solution. It was just a matter of looking harder for it. She returned once again to her last potential resource on the matter, SCP-6000-A. That cryptic snake woman they'd first discovered in the initial recon missions into SCP-6000. In many ways, SCP-6000-A echoed the sentiments of Agent Macmillan. To deny true fate is futile. Just this once, the Foundation had run out of silver bullets. Their end was coming, perfect and inevitable, and it will happen at the hands of the library and the Serpent. She told Director Moose that you don't get to choose how your stories end, only how you perceive the ending. This story, she says, ends with two people sitting in a room talking, and they vanish into thin air. Tired of the Snake Woman's cryptic nonsense, Director Moose decided she was wasting her time. Determined, she, alongside the Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition, would find a way to stop this thing. They would end SCP-6000, reverse the damage it had caused, and save the day. Unfortunately, this time, they couldn't. The entire Amazon basin was quarantined by Project Fusillade, but it didn't matter. SCP-6000 just kept growing and growing and growing. Soon after, a BM-class Broken Masquerade scenario transpired, meaning that the Foundation and the GOC were no longer able to contain the secrets of this anomaly, as more and more of the Western Hemisphere was consumed by SCP-6000. The anomaly's object class was upgraded from Keter to Apollyon, as GOC Command and the O5 Council realized that the ship had officially sailed on its fight for containment, and for the future of planet Earth. As the Wanderer's library continued to consume more of the planet in the following days, the priorities of Project Fusillade shifted focus from containing SCP-6000 to getting as many key figures and anomalies as possible off of Earth or out of our dimension. All population centers, GOC bases, and Foundation sites were considered lost. It was over. The Serpent had won. One person who didn't flee with all the others was Director Moose, with the prognosis being that SCP-6000 would consume the entire world in the next 2 weeks. Moose decided to go down with the ship, spending her last days on a dying Earth with her final prisoner, SCP-6000-A. The Snake Woman tried to comfort Director Moose in the face of the end. She told her that all there really is in life is a collection of stories. One ending is the beginning to countless others. The end of this Earth, this Foundation, would simply unravel into more, splitting like a thread's end into infinite narrative possibilities. If Moose could only accept this, she would not see this as an ending, but as a wonderful new beginning, a possibility for more stories. That's why the library was making all these new empty bookcases. There would soon be an abundance of new knowledge to accommodate and fill its shelves. Still, Moose seemed mournful about what she saw as the end of her story, the end of the world. She asked 6000-A whether her attempts to stop everything had been pointless from the start, if this ending had always been set in stone. 6000-A responded, "The point was the same thing that it's ever been, to make new stories where there was once nothing. Be happy, Tilda. Your story is going to be remembered forever." How do you think Tilda Moose responded? Did she say, "You think people will read about us?" Or rather, did she ask, what if I don't want new stories? We'll give you a moment to think about it. Are you ready? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Because regardless of what Director Moose said, it would have ended exactly the same way. If this tale teaches you anything, it should be that you really can't choose your ending. You can only choose how you react to it. Director Moose looked up and realized she was no longer inside Facility 57. She was in the Wanderer's library, staring up at an infinitude of shelves that contained an expanse of books that were both boundless and immeasurable. She was surrounded by people and entities of all shapes and sizes, wearing robes, browsing the new collection, and she recognized all of her old Foundation friends and colleagues among them. Director Moose's story had come to an end, but what she had failed to grasp was that the end didn't just mean death, it meant the start of something new. New worlds, new dimensions, new canons, new anomalies. A vast infinity of stories, and from inside the Wanderer's library, with everyone she'd ever known, she could enjoy them all. The Wanderer's library and the Serpent's Hand hadn't killed her, they had saved her. This was Director Moose's happy ending, and also the ending of SCP-6000. But what if this wasn't the end? What if instead, Tilda Moose had chosen a third option and responded to 6000-A's comment about her story being remembered forever, not with a question, but a statement. Stories on stories. Perhaps if she had answered this way, then she would have been swept away from the world that was dying around them to somewhere new. And not just one world, but many, where she could have the chance to see a utopian version of Earth where anomalies were a part of everyday life, their powers a part of the fabric of society, where disease and suffering had become a thing of the past. She may then have seen alternate versions of her own story, where she remained a member of the Serpent's Hand until the very end, or even another where she was a member of the O5 Council. These were all stories running parallel to hers and ours, real yet untouchable. All she could do was watch these realities, knowing that she'd be unable to help or interact with the people she saw, just as SCP-6000-A had only been able to observe ours. But in the end, that was okay, because there was always another story to move on to. Someone else's story to become invested in, something else incredible to see. Because just like in the Wanderer's library, the end of one story only means the start of so many others. Now go check out SCP-5000-Y, the full story compilation, and SCP-XK Class End of the World Scenarios Explained for more SCP Foundation tales about the end of the world as we know it. If you can really call it an end, that is.